Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. In April 2003, I had an experience that truly shook me to my core. It happened one night while I was sleeping. I woke up suddenly, realizing I couldn't breathe. At first, I thought one of my cats had somehow decided to curl up on my face, as they often do. And as any cat owner knows, they're completely unapologetic about it. One wise person once told me, if cats were bigger, they'd eat you. It's so true. But when I became fully awake, I realized something was wrong. I couldn't move, and I wasn't suffocating because of a cat. The pillow under my head had somehow folded up over my face and was pressing down, blocking my ability to breathe. Panic set in. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. It was as though I was paralyzed. With all my might, I managed to move my head just slightly, pushing it back and forth. After a few moments of struggling, the pillow suddenly dropped from my face, and there, standing next to my bed, was a figure. It was tall, thin, and resembled the Grim Reaper, except it was dressed entirely in white. A skeleton-like figure in a long, heavy, hooded robe, covering everything but its hands, and where its face should have been was an empty, ethereal whiteness, like a void. In a split second, this figure reached down, grabbed my bedspread, and pulled it over my face, trying to suffocate me again. I could feel the pressure intensifying as the blanket tightened. I thought, this is it. This thing is going to kill me. But once again, I was paralyzed. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. But then, in a moment of clarity, I remembered something. I had been studying auras recently, learning about energy fields. I knew this might be my only chance. I focused with everything I had, imagining an energy field around me. When I felt it solidify, I pushed it outwards with every ounce of strength I had, directing it toward the figure beside my bed. In an instant, the bedspread was ripped off my face with such force that it nearly flew off the bed. I watched, stunned, as the figure was suddenly pushed backward, growing smaller and smaller, until it disappeared completely. The second it was gone, I was able to move again. I leaped out of bed, turned on all the lights, and began screaming and crying. The fear I felt was overwhelming. It wasn't just the terror of the encounter. It was the deep, visceral sensation that something had tried to kill me. I couldn't stop shaking. For the next 2 days, I couldn't function at all. I couldn't go to work. I couldn't even leave my apartment without feeling overwhelmed by anxiety. It took about a week before I could even step foot back into my bedroom. And it was a whole month before I could sleep without every light in the house being on. People who know about this event often ask me how I could still live in the same place after something so terrifying happened. And I always answer the same way. If something evil is after you, it will find you wherever you are. Moving won't change that. I was 6 years old when I had my first strange experience. It happened in the house where I grew up in Wheat Ridge, Colorado. One night, I was lying in bed, wide awake. The house was quiet, and everything felt still. Then, out of nowhere, I saw something that made my heart stop. A ghostly vision of my mother floating through the hallway. She moved so smoothly, almost like she was gliding. My stomach tightened with fear, but I managed to call out to her. A moment later, I heard her voice, but it wasn't coming from the hallway. It came from the next bedroom. She responded calmly, telling me everything was okay, and that she knew what was happening. I didn't understand what she meant, but something about the way she said it made me feel both comforted and uneasy at the same time. That night stayed with me, but I told myself it had to be my imagination. Then, 2 years later, when I was 8, something else happened. It was late at night, and once again, I was lying in bed, unable to sleep. As I stared at the ceiling, I saw movement from the corner of my eye. My breath caught as I turned my head. A dark figure, tall and shadowy, walked straight from our front door to the kitchen. The hallway was dim, but I could see it clearly. The strange part? I didn't hear a single sound. No creaking floors. No door opening or closing. It was as if the figure was floating. The next morning, I asked my parents if either of them had been up during the night. They both said no. After that, I started paying closer attention to things that felt off. And over the years, I had more than a few experiences. In 2008, when I was 31, I was at a friend's house in Westminster, Colorado. He had always said his house was haunted, but I wasn't sure if I believed him. That night, I decided to test it. Playing the role of ghost hunter, I asked, "If you're in this room, give us a sign." The room fell silent. Then, tap, tap. A chill ran down my spine. Another night, we were hanging out at his place again when we kept hearing that same tapping sound. One of my friends grabbed his camera and snapped a picture toward the noise. When we looked at the screen, we couldn't believe what we saw. There, clear as day, was the image of a man. He wore Viking-style clothing, and the strangest part, he was smiling right at the camera. There's a road in Thornton, Colorado, about 15 minutes from my house, with a long history of hauntings. It's called Riverdale Road, and the stories about it are chilling. Some say if you're driving late at night, a mysterious car will pull up behind you, trying to race. If you accept the challenge, the car vanishes into thin air, and some believe it could lead to your death. I've had my own experiences there. The first time I went was in 2008, around Halloween. A few friends and I drove down the road looking for a tree where witches were rumored to have been hanged. As we searched, an old pickup truck appeared behind us. Its windows were covered in dirt, and it followed us, slow and steady, like something out of a horror movie. We finally found the tree and pulled over. The truck passed us and disappeared into the night. As we stood there, staring up at the twisted branches, we heard something strange, laughter. It was the sound of girls giggling, close by. We looked around, but there was no one there, just an empty dirt path leading to an old dairy farm. A small ditch ran alongside the road, and as we watched, we saw something. A woman, dressed in white, appearing and disappearing. My friends wanted to leave. I wasn't ready yet, but I was the one driving, so we got in the car and left. When I got home that night, I turned off my car and heard a soft clicking sound. At first, I didn't think much of it, but from that night on, the sound returned, randomly, for the next 8 years. It wasn't until I got rid of that car in 2016 that it finally stopped. We went back to Riverdale Road the next night. This time, we didn't see much, but when we reached the tree, we heard a strange continuous noise coming from it, like a hum or a whisper. A few nights later, a friend and I returned. This time, curiosity got the best of us, and we decided to drive closer to the dairy farm. We didn't get far. A dark figure floated toward us. He wore an apron and held a knife. We turned around and got out of there fast. The last time I saw anything strange on Riverdale Road was in 2009. We got lost looking for the tree when a car sped up behind us, passed us, then disappeared. Later that night, we saw a shadow cross the road right in front of us. That was the last time I ever went back. When I got married in 2013, my wife and I decided to spend our honeymoon at the famous Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, one of Colorado's most haunted locations. At first, everything seemed normal, but every time I took a shower in our room, I had the overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. One night, as I was lying in bed, something strange happened. I was on my stomach when I suddenly felt pressure, like someone was pushing down on my back. I froze. Slowly, I turned over, expecting to see my wife. She was asleep. We took a ghost tour at the hotel, and one story stuck with me. A maid who died in a fire was said to haunt the hotel, trying to separate couples she didn't think were properly married. Was she the one pressing down on my back? In early 2023, I spoke with 2 mediums to try to connect with my parents, who had passed away. Both experiences felt successful, but during my second session, something unexpected happened. I made contact with someone else, Marilyn Monroe, or, as I prefer to call her, Norma Jean, I don't know why, but weeks after my mother's passing in 1998, I suddenly felt drawn to her. I had seen her pictures before, but this was different. Over the years, I had dreams about her. Sometimes she didn't look quite like herself, but I always knew it was her. In one dream, I was walking somewhere and saw her. A voice, either mine or hers, said, "See you later." That same night, I had 2 more dreams about her. In 2007, I visited her crypt and the famous mirror at the Roosevelt Hotel, where her reflection had supposedly been seen. During my session with the medium, we talked about Norma Jean. Then, something fell behind me. I was sitting on my goddaughter's bed, surrounded by stuffed animals. Nothing should have moved, but something did. It didn't feel threatening. If anything, it felt like a quiet hello. Later, I told the medium about it, and she thought it was amazing. Was Norma Jean my guardian angel? It's a question I may never fully answer, but one thing's for sure. Throughout my life, I've had experiences that I can't explain, and sometimes I wonder if I ever will. My mom and dad once had a strange experience while staying with my uncle in California. At the time, my sister was about 5 years old, and I hadn't been born yet. They were staying in an old house my uncle owned, and one evening, they all sat around the dinner table. They had made a really spicy chili, and as they ate, the conversation turned to ghosts. My uncle casually mentioned that he had a ghost in the house. My mom, always the skeptic, shook her head and said she didn't believe in any of that. The night went on, and eventually, everyone went to bed. Sometime later, my mom woke up to the faint sound of someone stirring something in a cup. It was coming from the kitchen. Half asleep, she figured it was just my uncle mixing some soda water for his heartburn. She didn't think much of it and went back to sleep. The next morning, over breakfast, she casually asked my uncle if he had been up in the kitchen during the night. He looked at her, confused, and said he hadn't. My aunt, sitting across from them, confirmed that he had slept through the night. My mom didn't say anything more, but a strange feeling settled in her stomach. A few nights later, she was lying in bed, unable to sleep. Her eyes wandered to a picture of Christ hanging on the wall. As she stared at it, the image seemed to shift. The once peaceful expression twisted into something dark, something almost demonic. A chill ran down her spine. Before she could process what she was seeing, she felt it. A hand, resting on her foot. It didn't move, didn't squeeze, just sat there, heavy and cold. My mom is a strong woman. She doesn't scare easily. But in that moment, she was terrified. That wasn't the end of it. Later that week, another uncle of mine came to stay with them. His wife had been in the bathroom when, out of nowhere, she panicked. She locked the door, climbed out through the window, and came back inside through the front door. When she saw my mom and my aunt, her face was pale, her breathing heavy. She looked at them and said, "I know what you're up to, and if I have to, I can get out of here." She wasn't the type to act irrationally. She was always calm, always reasonable, but something in that house had shaken her to her core. When we were kids, we lived in a big old house. I was still in preschool, and my oldest sibling was in 4th grade. My brothers and sisters and I used to love wearing our mom's pink high heels. I remember that whenever I put them on, I'd pretend to be a famous tap dancer. The heels made a pretty clinking sound on the wooden floors. Well, it sounded pretty to us back then anyway. Our mom, though, wasn't a fan of the noise. She'd yell at us to stop, sometimes several times a day. But that didn't stop us. We took turns walking around the house, anywhere we could make the shoes click or clunk. One day, my brother decided to show off. He put on the pink heels and went up and down the stairs, trying to prove he could do it without tripping. After going up and down a few times, he took the shoes off and left them at the top of the stairs. Then, my sister tried. She did the same thing, walking up and down before leaving the shoes at the bottom. When it was my turn, I only made it up the stairs before I heard our mom yelling from the kitchen, She warned us again not to play with her shoes because we fall and hurt ourselves. So I left the shoes at the top and ran back down to join my siblings. We all sat together in the den, watching TV while our mom cooked in the kitchen. Then, out of nowhere, we heard a clunking noise from the top of the stairs. It got louder, like something was coming down the steps. We all rushed over to the stairs to see what it was. There, at the bottom of the stairs, were our mom's pink heels. I knew for sure I had left them at the top. We were all confused. We went back to the den, trying to brush it off. But just a few minutes later, we heard the noise again. This time, we ran back to the stairs and saw something that made my heart skip a beat. The shoes were moving. They were going up and down the stairs, all on their own, like someone invisible was wearing them. I couldn't believe my eyes. Even as a little kid, I just stood there, frozen, staring at the shoes. Our mom called out from the kitchen, telling us to stop playing around. But we couldn't. We were too scared. We screamed and ran to hide behind her. We told her what happened. When she went to check, though, the shoes had stopped moving. Nothing was there. I'll never forget how creepy that felt. It's like ghosts love playing tricks on kids, but when adults are around, they just stop. On April 29, 1991, during our honeymoon at the Crescent Hotel in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, we had an encounter we'll never forget. That night, a storm rolled in, bringing heavy rain and tornadoes through Wichita and Oklahoma. The wind howled outside as we settled into the governor's suite. Strangely enough, my parents had come along on the trip. They had their own room within the suite, just above Michael's pub. All night, they heard the faint sound of piano keys tinkling below them. Around 1:00 a.m., after a quick trip to the restroom, I slid back into bed. The air conditioning had been running, but suddenly, the room felt unbearably warm. I assumed it was just the humidity rising outside and didn't think much of it. I turned over to snuggle with my husband when, out of nowhere, a deep moan echoed through the room. The sound came from the upper right side of the room, nowhere near my husband. A chill ran down my spine. Every hair on my body stood on end. I pressed in closer to him, trying to shake off the fear. Then he bolted upright, screaming at the top of his lungs and thrashing wildly in the bed. I panicked, shouting for him to stop. His reaction terrified me more than the moan had. After a few chaotic moments, he finally calmed down, insisting everything was fine. But I could see it in his face. Something had happened. By 3:00 a.m., I had given up on sleep. I sat up, watching the Weather Channel and sipping a Diet Pepsi, trying to shake the unease. Not long after, Lee woke up too. We sat together in the dim light, replaying the night's events. When I finally asked what had scared him so badly, he hesitated. Then, sheepishly, he said, "You mean when I was yelling?" He took a deep breath before continuing. "There was someone standing on your side of the bed," he said, "dressed in white, just looking down at you. When I started yelling, it disappeared." My blood ran cold. Somehow, through all of this, my parents hadn't heard a thing. The next morning, I told my mom about it. She didn't seem as surprised as I expected. In fact, she admitted that she had seen a young girl in white that night as well. At the front desk, we asked if the hotel was haunted. The clerk barely blinked before replying. Of course. When we told him what had happened, he nodded knowingly. The Crescent Hotel was known for its ghosts, he explained, and we had likely been visited by at least 2 of them that night. Since then, we've stayed at the hotel several more times, but nothing quite like that has ever happened again. I do know another couple who had their own strange experiences there, and a friend of mine, who worked as a maid at the hotel years ago, has her own eerie stories to tell. Whatever we saw that night, we weren't alone. When I moved into a Civil War-era row house in Richmond, Virginia, back in 1992, I could tell right away that something felt off about the place. It wasn't anything obvious, just a feeling. My roommates and I would often sense a presence, as if someone was always watching. It took about a year before we finally figured out what it was. One night, my roommate Josh and I were sitting in the kitchen, just talking. I kept finding my attention drawn to the back corner of the room near the door. I wasn't sure why, but something about that spot felt different. Josh must have noticed my distraction because he turned to look. The moment he did, he froze, his eyes widening in shock. "What is it?" I asked. He shook his head, struggling for words. "I don't know, but something's there." I couldn't see anything, but the way he reacted told me he had. Over the next week, I decided to try communicating with whatever was in our house. This wasn't new for me. I had been speaking with spirits for about 15 years. At first, all I sensed was a formless mist, but slowly, over time, it changed. The mist took on shape, becoming clearer each day until I could see her. She was a teenage girl, dressed in Civil War-era clothing. When I spoke to her, she looked relieved, as if she had been waiting for someone, anyone, to acknowledge her. Her name was Angela. She told me that no one had spoken to her in over 20 years. The last people who lived in the house never even knew she was there. She had died in that house when she was 16, but she wouldn't tell me how or why she hadn't moved on. Angela and I grew close. We talked often, spent time together. She liked watching TV with me, even though she couldn't physically interact with anything. Sometimes at night, she would lie beside me while I slept. There was nothing frightening about it, just a quiet companionship. But what she loved most was reading. Of course, without a physical form, she couldn't hold a book or turn the pages. So I would ask her what kinds of stories she liked, then go out and find books for her. We would read together, her looking over my shoulder as I turned the pages. For a while, it felt like a strange but peaceful friendship. Then things changed. My financial situation worsened, and I had to leave the house. Angela and I were both devastated. I even asked if there was a way she could come with me, but she just shook her head. She had to stay. Eventually, I left Richmond altogether. But even now, late at night, my thoughts sometimes drift back to that old row house. When they do, I can feel her presence, just as she can feel mine. And in that quiet, across the miles, we smile at each other. I hope that someday she finds whatever it is she's searching for. And when she's ready, I hope she finally moves on. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I was 15 when my parents rented a beach house from a friend at work. It was in Bricktown, New Jersey, a quiet little community with its own private beach, not far from Seaside or Point Pleasant. The house sat right on the bay, with a crabbing dock 100 feet from the back door. The dead-end street made the evenings peaceful, but something about the house never felt entirely right. We arrived late, close to midnight. My parents and sister went straight through the house and out to look at the bay, but I stayed inside. The place had a sailor's charm, well worn, decorated in a nautical theme, with a 2-story A-frame ceiling and a massive boulder fireplace. Windows surrounded the family room, making it feel open, but the covered staircase leading to the second floor was odd. From where I sat, I could see the 2-bedroom doors at the end of a narrow catwalk. Then, suddenly, I felt it. A shift in the air. A vibration. Something in the far right corner near the bedrooms. My neck prickled, a wave of fear washing over me so fast that I bolted outside to my mother. The words tumbled out before I even thought. "Is this house haunted?" She didn't hesitate. "How did you know?" She wasn't surprised. She had already heard the stories. Previous guests had taken photos inside, capturing hazy shapes on film. The house had once belonged to a doctor who specialized in cancer research. His daughter, ironically, had been diagnosed with leukemia. She was 16 when she died. The real events, though, happened the following summer when we returned. This time, I brought my friend Monica and her boyfriend. I had warned her about the house, but she didn't believe me. The first night, Monica and I slept upstairs in the bedroom next to my parents. We were still giggling and whispering around midnight when we turned off the lights. Seconds later, the wooden stairs began to creak. A knock followed at our door. We both froze, staring at it, waiting for someone to enter. But nothing did. Our faces drained of color. Neither of us wanted to stay upstairs. We ran down to the guest room, kicked her boyfriend out of bed, and tried to sleep. Sometime later, I woke to a deep, booming noise, like someone pounding on the pipes. Then suddenly, the old alarm clock on top of the refrigerator blared music. The channels changed rapidly, as if an invisible hand was twisting the dial back and forth. I was paralyzed. Her boyfriend got up and turned it off. The next morning, I asked if he had unplugged it, but he said no. My parents heard it too, yet neither of them had touched it. When I checked, the cord was still coiled on the counter. It had never been plugged in. There was always a presence in that house, something unseen but felt. A weight on my shoulders when I walked down the hallway, a tensing in my muscles when I passed the basement door. No matter what, I could never bring myself to go down those stairs. The strangest part came the following year. I brought new friends, hoping to share the eerie experience, but as soon as I stepped inside, I knew the house was empty. Not of people, but of something else. It was just a house now. No cold spots. No footsteps. No weight pressing down on my chest. Later, my mother told me the owners had cleaned out the basement before we arrived. They had found the daughter's old possessions stored down there, and they had gotten rid of them. My name is Anna, and this happened when I was about 9 years old. I moved from Japan to Leh when I was 7, with my 2 older brothers, my sister, my little brother Jun, and our mom. My dad stayed behind in Japan because of his job, but he joined us a year later. One day, my mom went grocery shopping with my oldest siblings, Matthew and Catalin, while Jun, Ron, and I stayed home. Jun and I were playing when I suddenly felt someone tug on my hair. I thought it was him, so I hit him back. Ron got mad at me for that, but I told him what happened. He didn't believe me, and neither did I. We just moved on. The next day, I was in my parents' room looking for paper to draw on when I saw a little girl standing in the doorway. She looked about my age with brown hair and pigtails and wearing a knee-length white dress. We just stared at each other for a moment. Then she turned and walked away without saying a word. I remembered we had some guests that day, so after they left, I asked my mom if that was their daughter. She looked at me confused and said she didn't know what I was talking about. I argued with her for a while, but she didn't seem to take me seriously, so I gave up. 2 days later, I was watching TV in the living room when Catalin came to me and said my friend was waiting at the door for me. I was confused and asked, "What friend? I don't know anyone here." But she insisted and dragged me to the door, only to find no one there. She was puzzled, but then she said she was there earlier. I asked her to describe the girl, and when she did, it was the same girl I had seen in my parents' room. That made me curious, and since I wasn't afraid of anything back then, I didn't think much of it. The word ghost never crossed my mind. I decided that the next time I saw the girl, I'd ask her why she was following me. 3 weeks passed, and I hadn't seen her again, until one day. I was in Matthew's room with Jun and Ron, looking for a video game, when I saw the girl sitting on my brother's bed. Jun and Ron didn't notice her because they were busy looking in the closet. I couldn't help myself. I yelled, "Hey, why do you keep following me? What do you want?" My brothers asked who I was talking to, but I ignored them. The girl started to leave, so I followed her into my room and tried to talk to her. To my surprise, she spoke back. She told me her name was Sally, and that she was dead. This used to be her house, and she and her parents were killed by her older sister because their parents always favored her more, even though they loved both of them equally. Sally told me she missed her sister, even though jealousy had caused her death. Her sister was still alive. I couldn't believe it. I told her I didn't believe her and thought it was all just a joke. I said, "What's your name? Why have you been following me? This is a pretty good joke, but you're starting to creep me out." Sally calmly replied, "I'm Sally. This isn't a joke. I'm a ghost, and I'll prove it." Then she walked through my wall and came back. My heart raced. I was talking to a ghost, and I didn't know what to think. I wanted to scream, but instead I asked, "Aren't ghosts supposed to be mean? Why are you being so nice?" Sally told me she wasn't mean, and all she wanted was a friend. She explained that we were the third family to live in the house, and that every time she tried to make friends with the other kids, they'd get scared, and their families would end up moving away. Now I'm 13, and I'm not scared of Sally anymore. She became my friend. We still talk, though I'm the only one who knows about her. It was December 1982, and I was working on an old farmhouse near Campbellford, Ontario, looking after poultry, sheep, and goats with a friend. The farm belonged to a bookkeeper from Toronto who had hired us to stay there and run things. The weather had been unusually mild, warm enough that my buddy was still plowing the fields late into the night, the full moon casting a silver glow over the land. Our day started at 5 in the morning and stretched well past midnight. That night, after loading up the old wood-burning furnace in the basement, we finally turned in. I had a habit of reading before sleep, and after about 20 minutes, I switched off the light. The moonlight still filled the room, filtering through the window and casting soft shadows across the floor. I drifted off quickly but woke up to find a girl standing beside my bed. She wore a long nightgown, her expression sorrowful, and I could see right through her. The moon had shifted in the sky. I could tell a few hours had passed since I first fell asleep. Something else had changed, too. The striped wallpaper in the room had become a floral print, delicate roses blooming along the walls. I had encountered spirits before, so I wasn't afraid. There was something unbearably sad about her presence, something that compelled me to ask what she wanted. She looked directly at me, and though her lips never moved, I heard her story as clearly as if she had spoken aloud. She and her younger sister had been orphaned and sent to live with their aunt and uncle on this farm. This very room had been hers. Their uncle had started an incestuous relationship with her, threatening to throw them both out if she ever told anyone. He promised he would leave her younger sister alone if she complied. That was a lie. When the younger sister became pregnant, they realized he had been telling them both the same story. The girls didn't know how their uncle would react when he found out, and they feared how their aunt, who had turned a blind eye to his actions, might respond. Then the story became hazy, like I wasn't able to absorb everything she was telling me. But the next part was as clear as the cold December night. Their uncle had killed them both and buried them in the basement. He told his wife and the neighbors that they had run off with some no-good man headed out west, and as far as he was concerned, it was good riddance. As the girl faded, the wallpaper shifted before my eyes. The roses disappeared, replaced once more by the original stripes. I was still sitting up in bed, fully awake. I hadn't just imagined it. I hadn't even woken up from a dream. Unable to shake the feeling, I went down to the basement, following the location she had shown me. The poured concrete floor was covered in dirt and debris, but after sweeping away some dust, I found a patch where the floor had been poorly repaired, right at the bottom of the stairs, in front of the old furnace. In the morning, I told my buddy what had happened. He found it strange, but he also knew I wouldn't make something like this up. We debated whether to ask the boss for permission to dig up the floor or just go ahead and do it ourselves, making repairs afterward. But doubt crept in. Did I really want to find the remains of 2 girls buried there? And if I did, how would I explain how I knew they were there? If we found nothing, I would look like someone whose imagination had spun out of control. I always wondered if there was a real story about 2 girls, one around 16, the other 14, who had supposedly run away in the 1920s and were never heard from again. And I wondered what would happen if I returned to that house and somehow convinced the owner to let me dig up part of his basement. He would probably chase me off with a shotgun. More than anything, I wondered if I had let down a spirit who had reached beyond the grave to share the truth. If I did, I only hope she forgives me. About a month ago, I was home alone. My brother and dad were out buying a guitar, and my mom was at work. I was working on an essay when I suddenly heard someone call my name. It freaked me out, so I quickly checked outside my door and walked around the house, holding a knife for protection. Every creak of the wooden floors made me jump, and I screamed every time I turned around, convinced someone was there. But when I found nobody, I went back to my room, knife still in hand, and called my friend to calm myself down. I closed the door behind me and tried to talk things through. As we were chatting, everything seemed normal, until my music, which I hadn't turned off, stopped suddenly in the middle of a song. I stared at my computer, trying to figure out what happened. My friend kept asking if I was okay, but before I could answer, the music started playing again. Only, it wasn't the same song. It was a completely different one, and I didn't have that song on my playlist. I was terrified. I asked my friend if she could come over, and she said she'd be there in 5 minutes. Just as I hung up, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, expecting to see her, but there was nobody there. I quickly locked the door and went back to my room, sitting in the corner near the door with all the lights on, except for the upstairs lights. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang again. I rushed to get it, and this time it was my friend. I hugged her tightly and told her everything that had happened. We decided to search the house together, but we found nothing. To calm me down, we decided to watch some TV. As we sat down, my turtle unexpectedly jumped into the water, and I screamed. Right at that moment, I heard someone call my name. The voice sounded eerily familiar, like my neighbor who had passed away some time ago. I froze. We had been given her favorite jewelry box, and I remembered that my mom had it upstairs. My friend heard everything too. We were both freaked out and decided to call my brother's friend, who was 15 at the time. He came over to help us search the house. We checked everywhere except upstairs. I was too afraid to go up there. We sat together in the living room, which had a clear view of the stairs, trying to distract ourselves by talking about school. But then we all heard it. Hannah, Hannah, where are you? I knew it was her voice. It sounded just like my late neighbor calling for me, just as she used to. My heart raced, and I felt a strange presence in the room. I screamed, and we all huddled together on the couch, too scared to move. Suddenly, I felt something touch my foot. I screamed again, and we sat there, frozen in place, watching for anything unusual. My parents usually called before coming home, but while we were sitting there, we heard the garage door open slowly. We were shocked to find that no one was there when we checked. So we kept the door open, played some music, and turned on the TV, hoping the noise and light would keep us safe. An hour later, my dad and brother came home with a new guitar and amp, and to my relief, the strange events stopped, or so I thought. That night, while I was talking to my friends on AIM with my door closed, I heard footsteps. My parents and brother were in the living room watching TV, so I knew nobody was walking near my room. But I distinctly heard someone walking down the small staircase to my hallway. I looked through the crack in the door and saw the shadow of feet moving in the hall, stopping right next to my door. I flung it open, only to find nothing but a pair of shoes lying across the hall. They weren't there before. After that, I stayed with my parents for the rest of the night. Since then, nothing else strange has happened in the house. Back in 2002, I was the lead vocalist of a gothic rock band. We often performed at an alternative club in the heart of Pretoria. Just a few blocks from the club stood the Church Street Cemetery, a vast old graveyard with a section called Heroes Acre. It was the final resting place for important historical figures like Paul Kruger and Eugene Moore. Many of the graves dated back to the 1800s, and time had worn them down. Some tombstones were cracked, others nearly swallowed by the earth. It had an eerie stillness, as if history itself had been left to fade. One night, after a late gig, I had my first unsettling encounter there. My bandmate Alan and I were on our way to a friend's place in the early hours of the morning when we drove past the cemetery. As we passed, Alan suddenly pointed toward the fence. "Do you see that?" he asked, his voice uneasy. A young woman stood there, dressed in a flowing white gown. She was staring straight at us. At first, I couldn't figure out what was so disturbing about her. But then I noticed she wasn't just pale. She was glowing. And below her knees, nothing. There were no legs. She wasn't fading into mist or shadow. It was as if the lower half of her body simply wasn't there. We locked eyes with her for a moment. Then, without breaking her gaze, she took a single step back, disappearing into the darkness as we turned the corner. Ellen and I were shaken, yet oddly excited. Our friend, who was driving, hadn't seen her and dismissed it as our imagination. We passed by the cemetery many times after that, but we never saw her again. Months later, a photographer offered to do a promotional shoot for our band. He suggested Heroes Acre as the backdrop, thinking it would fit our gothic aesthetic. It felt a little cliché, but we agreed. It was free, after all. On a bright Saturday afternoon, we arrived at the cemetery. Almost immediately, something felt off. It was the kind of feeling you get when you know someone is watching you, but when you turn around, no one's there. We started with group shots, then moved on to individual portraits. While looking for interesting spots, the photographer found a small monument, a stone angel, hands pressed together in prayer. "Try kneeling in front of it," he suggested. As I knelt, I glanced at the inscription. It was the grave of a young girl. She had died far too young. A sudden, crushing weight pressed down on my shoulders. The air felt thick, almost like I was being surrounded by something unseen. I wanted to get this over with, but just as the photographer was about to take the shot, his camera stopped working. "Hold that pose," he muttered, adjusting the settings. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. Small gray shapes darting between the tombstones. My breath caught in my throat. And then, I felt it. The pressure on my shoulders grew heavier, like invisible hands pushing down on me. The weight was suffocating. Just as I was about to run, the camera finally snapped back to life. The photographer took the shot, and I jumped to my feet, stepping away as fast as I could. The others stared at me, confused. I explained what I had felt. That's when my bandmates admitted they had also felt like they were being watched during the shoot. Later, when the photographer developed the pictures, something in the last shot made my stomach drop. Just behind a tombstone to my right was a small figure. It was about the size of a porcelain doll. Its head was slightly turned toward me. Its face, twisted, unnatural. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. Maybe it was something else. But I know one thing for sure. It's not an experience I want to relive. I live in California and have had several ghostly experiences. One of the first occurred in November 2006, when my mom's friends, Tammy and Chrissy, were over at our house. Chrissy had recently lost a close friend, and she was talking about her friend who had passed away when something strange happened. My mom went to get some wine glasses from the cupboard. She grabbed one but left it open for a second, and then, without warning, all of the glasses flew off the shelf and shattered on the floor. The oddest part was that the hardest parts of the glasses were broken, but the softest parts didn't have a scratch on them. It was as if some invisible force had targeted them. Another event occurred in December 2006. I was in the shower when I felt someone's hand rub up and down my back. I was confused at first because there was no one there, but it was so real. I stepped back from the water, trying to process what had happened, and when I did, the water instantly turned ice cold. I had the temperature set to warm, so I was freaked out. I adjusted the water again, but it didn't make sense. Then when I got the courage to leave the shower, I almost tripped because the entire bathroom was covered in fog. The water wasn't even hot enough to create steam like that, so I was completely freaked out. Later in December 2006, my mom was cleaning the house. She heard some strange noises but didn't think much of it at first. She was dusting the TV, and when she went to grab another rag, every TV in the house turned on by itself. My mom turned them off, but then all the computers powered on by themselves. After she turned those off, the water in the bathtub started running on its own. Feeling completely unsettled, my mom decided to leave the house for the day and go to the mall with her friends to get some peace of mind. In January 2007, something even creepier happened. It was around midnight, and I was talking to my boyfriend, Seth, on the phone. I have an attic in my house, and while I was chatting, I heard footsteps above me. I thought it was just a house settling, but then I heard stomping, like someone was walking around up there. The attic is locked, and no one has been up there in months. The only time anyone goes up there is for things like fixing power cords or installing a fan, so I had no idea who or what was making the noise. I've done some research, and apparently no one has passed away in my house. Yet these strange events continue to happen. My family is into tarot and some witchcraft, and I've been to a psychic a while back for a fortune reading. She told me that in a past life, I was drowned by a family member. The really strange part is that when I was 5 years old, I started speaking Latin in my sleep, and I don't know any Latin. My mom did some research and found out I was saying things like, "No, stop, leave me alone. I didn't do anything to you. Stop, please, I beg of you." Then I started screaming. To this day, when I'm in certain locations or houses I don't know, I start speaking Latin again. All of this has left me wondering where these spirits are coming from and what connection they might have to me. The experiences seem tied to something deeper, possibly from my past life, or even from the energy my family is dealing with. I'm not sure, but it's all been very unsettling. I was home watching my little sister one night while my parents were out. Not that I'd be going anywhere. I was busy playing the latest game that had just been released. My dog, Sheriff, was lying next to me, relaxed, until suddenly his ears perked up. You know that thing dogs do when they hear something. I paused my game, listening for whatever had caught his attention. Nothing. Figuring it was just someone walking outside, I shrugged it off. Then, without warning, Sheriff jumped off the bed and ran out through the half-open door. His barking echoed through the house, sharp and frantic. I rolled my eyes and yelled for him to stop, but instead of settling down, his barking changed. It was no longer just noisy. It was aggressive, almost like he was trying to scare something away. That's when I got a bad feeling. I got up and followed him. His nails scraped against the wooden basement steps as he flew down, disappearing into the darkness. My heart pounded. He was chasing something. I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, staring into the pitch-black basement below. A part of me didn't want to go down there, but I had to. Slowly, I stepped forward, flipping the light switch as I descended. Sheriff stood stiffly in front of the laundry room door, growling. Every instinct in me screamed not to open it. I didn't know what, or who, was inside, but I trusted Sheriff enough to believe it wasn't good. I hesitated for a second, then scooped him up and bolted back up the stairs. Just as I reached the top, I heard it. The creak of the laundry room door opening. Panic surged through me as I slammed the basement door shut and locked it. Pressing my ear against the wood, I could barely make out the sound of quiet footsteps creeping up the stairs, just beneath me. My hands shook as I grabbed the phone and called the police. Minutes later, they arrived and searched the basement. They found him, a man trying to escape through the small basement window. He was arrested on the spot. As the officers led him out to their car, he turned to look at me. The way he stared, I'll never forget it. But more than that, I'll never forget Sheriff. Without him, I don't even want to imagine how that night would have ended. Over time, the strange occurrences in our apartment escalated. Taps were left running. Cupboards stood open without explanation. Footsteps echoed at night. An eerie wind would stir the curtains, even when the windows were shut. Being devout Hindus, we prayed daily, but the disturbances didn't stop. Then came the voice. Faint but unsettling, it mimicked the chants of our prayers. My sister and I took to leaving the radio on at night to drown it out. We had lived in that apartment for 2 years, and though we had almost grown used to the disturbances, one night changed everything. I had been studying late in the dining room and decided to sleep there. At some point, I was woken by a voice calling my name. At first, I thought it was my sister. Then I opened my eyes. a child stood in front of me. She looked like my sister, but younger, and something about her face wasn't right. There was something sinister in her expression. I was frozen. My mind screamed at me to move, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. I started to pray. As I did, the child's voice shifted. It became a raspy, aged whisper. An old woman's voice. The figure leaned in, so close I could feel its breath on my skin. Then, without a sound, it turned and disappeared. The moment I could move, I screamed. My mother and sister came running. As I recounted what I had seen, my sister's face paled. She had seen it too. A figure standing by her bed at night, whispering her name. She had never told us. She had been too afraid. The next day, we sought help from a Hindu priestess. After performing a cleansing ritual, she told us that an entity had been sent to us by someone who wished our family harm. Though she wouldn't reveal who it was, we couldn't understand why anyone would target a single mother and her 2 daughters. Following her advice, we cut all ties to whatever was haunting us. Soon after, we moved out, and we never looked back. Underscore 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 underscore. Years later, my mother was admitted to Universitas Hospital in Bloemfontein for a heart bypass. My sister, a friend, and I traveled there to be with her, staying with our friend's sister just a block from the hospital. After surgery, Mom recovered quickly and was moved from the ICU to a shared 4-bed ward. Her bed was the first on the right as you entered, with an empty bed beside her near the window. 2 other women occupied the room, a black lady and an Indian lady whose bed was directly across from Mom's. That evening, we visited her. As we sat chatting, the room was interrupted by an unmistakable sound. A deep, masculine cough. It came from the empty bed by the window. All of us turned. No one was there. We joked about it, trying to brush it off, but the sound had come from behind my friend and her sister. One of them suggested it might be from the neighboring room, but we knew better. The next morning, the Indian lady was discharged, and Mom was moved to her bed. Now, only she and the black lady remained in the room. The visits that day were peaceful. Then came Friday night. My sister and I stayed a little later than usual, keeping Mom company. The black lady, who had no visitors that evening, chatted with us for a while. But after we left, the night took a terrifying turn. The next morning, Mom recounted what had happened. The woman in the single room near the entrance had called the nurses in a panic, insisting something was lying on top of her. No matter how much they checked, she refused to return to her bed and eventually slept in a chair. Then the black lady beside Mom started screaming for help. Something, she said, was holding her down, choking her. She begged to be moved. Elsewhere in the ward, a young boy recovering from heart surgery and an elderly paralyzed man had been sleeping soundly, yet their call bell rang repeatedly throughout the night. When nurses arrived, they found no reason for it. And then there were the screams, echoing through the halls, keeping the staff on edge. That was when Mom saw him. A man dressed in black, standing in the doorway of the toilet, watching her. She blinked, and he was gone. We were unnerved by her story, but we tried to keep her spirits up. After visiting ours, we went to the mall, bought her some gifts, and prepared for our trip back home to KwaZulu-Natal. When we returned, Mom had seen him again. This time, he wasn't just standing in the doorway. He walked into the room, past the beds, and vanished through the solid wall. We did our best to stay calm. As we sat with her that evening, my sister lounged at the foot of the bed, texting, while I sat by the window. Then she jerked upright. Someone just played with my hair. We tried to brush it off, until I felt it. A light touch on the back of my neck. Then a sharp tug. I gasped, nearly losing my balance. Mom's eyes widened. It looked like you were covered in a faint blue mist," she said. Before I could respond, my sister noticed something even stranger. The empty bed by the window was breathing. The mattress rose and fell, as if someone invisible lay on it. A faint white hue hovered above it. She placed her hand on the bed. It was warm, like someone had just been there. That was enough for us. It was late, and we decided it was time to leave. As we reached the door, I felt a light but unmistakable touch on my lower back. A hand. I spun around. No one. Mom chuckled. "Maybe the uncle likes you." We forced a laugh, but our pace quickened. At the elevator, the doors opened and shut repeatedly, as if something was toying with them. We took the stairs. Only when we stepped outside did the tension finally ease. The next morning, we returned to fetch Mom. And we never spoke of it again. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. One day, my best friend Diane and I decided to skip school and hang out at her house. Diane's family was well off, so I was always impressed by their beautiful house. It had fancy furniture, big rooms, and everything seemed perfect. But something about it made me feel uneasy. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there was definitely an unsettling vibe. At one point, Diane had to use the bathroom, and I jokingly asked her not to go. She laughed, thinking I was being silly, but I insisted on going with her. After that, we went to the mall, and Diane never said anything about the house's strange energy. Even after high school, we stayed best friends, and I was basically part of her family. In 1986, I stayed over at Diane's house for the first time. The same eerie feeling lingered, but I managed to get through the night without anything major happening. However, a few years later, around 1988 or 1989, I spent Christmas there, and that's when I learned something truly disturbing. I was chatting with Diane's sister and her husband in another room when I overheard them laughing. I asked what was so funny, and they casually mentioned a ghost that haunted the house. My eyes must have gotten wide because they went on to explain that all of them had felt a strange presence. Finally, they had all seen it. Diane told me that one night she felt someone get into bed with her. At first, she thought it was her sister Nancy coming home drunk. But when she looked down, she could see no arm, even though she could feel one resting over her. Diane panicked, jumped out of bed, and ran to her parents' room. Her parents also had their own eerie experiences. They'd wake up in the middle of the night to see a figure standing at the end of the hallway, just watching them. It never entered their room, but they could see its head peering in. Diane's sister, Nancy, saw it too. One night she woke up feeling like someone was behind her. She was too scared to turn over, but finally forced herself to. When she did, she saw a black, hooded figure standing at the foot of her bed. Terrified, she jumped out of bed and ran straight into her parents' room. Nancy didn't just see the figure at night, though. One afternoon, she came home with her boyfriend around 4:30 p.m. and forgot her key. They found an open window and decided to climb in. As Nancy was halfway through, she looked up and saw the black figure walk right by the room she was entering. She screamed for her boyfriend to pull her back out, and they waited outside until her mom came home. The haunting didn't stop there. One night, the figure entered Diane's parents' bedroom. Her mom woke up to find it there and started screaming for her husband to wake up, but he wouldn't. She even scratched his face in a desperate attempt to get his attention. Finally, she managed to turn on the lights, and the figure disappeared. I was angry that Diane hadn't told me about any of this earlier, especially after the creepy vibes I'd felt when I first visited her house. She explained that everyone who visited the house had the same feeling, but she didn't want to scare anyone. She had known about the ghost, but didn't share it with me because she didn't want to frighten me off. Eventually, Diane's family moved out, and her cousins moved into the house. They didn't believe in the ghost stories, but according to Diane, Their family had been through a lot of turmoil ever since. Diane told me something that might explain it all. A friend of her father's had visited the house one day and asked, "What are you guys doing with that?" Referring to a statue they had. It was an old eerie statue they'd bought at an antique store. Diane's mom liked it because it was unique, but the friend, who knew about such things, warned them that it was a representation of an evil god, worshipped by people who would make sacrifices. Diane's parents didn't believe the statue could be cursed, so they ignored the warning. They left it behind when they moved. There's one more thing. Back in 1998, I had a strange experience of my own. I was driving home from a friend's house, and it was exactly midnight when I reached the top of a hill on Colima Road. Just as I got to the top, a UFO flew right over the road in front of me. At first, I thought it might have been a reflection on my windshield, but there were no streetlights, and it was pitch dark. The UFO looked like a tennis ball at arm's length, streaking across the sky toward the La Habra area. UFOs, ghosts, urban legends, and even rumors of murders are all linked to the Colima Road Canyon area, and now I can understand why. For most of my life, I believed I lived among spirits until about 4 years ago. Now, at 20, I live with my grandmother, aunt, parents, and younger sister. We recently moved, though I spent the past year and a half away at college. But before that, strange things were a part of my everyday life. My mother always told me that the first house we lived in, where I spent the first 2.5 years of my life, was haunted. I don't remember those early years, but according to her, the house held more than just our family. She spoke of an old sailor's spirit. He wasn't friendly. Whenever she went to do laundry, she'd feel him hit her, leaving bruises on her arms. Then there was a lady spirit, gentle and protective, who always left behind the scent of lavender. My mother swore this woman used to sing my oldest sister to sleep at night, and one night that same spirit got rid of the sailor in a storm of flying pots and pans. I've never known if I truly believed that story, but the things I do remember, those I can't explain away. It started when I was 4 or 5. One night I was watching TV with my mom in the living room. From where I sat, I had a clear view through the dining area, which had been turned into a weight room. My sister's room was just beyond it, separated only by a hanging sheet since there were no doors inside the house aside from my parents' bedroom and the bathrooms. As I watched TV, something caught my eye. A woman. She moved gracefully across the dining area, dressed in what looked like an old wedding gown. Everything about her, her dress, her hair, even her skin, was completely white. I watched in stunned silence as she glided toward my sister's room and slipped through the sheet. The fabric swayed slightly as if someone had just passed through. I got up, cautiously stepping forward. The room was empty. My mother hadn't seen anything, but years later, she told me she always believed the spirit of a murdered bride had been trapped in our house. That wasn't the last time something unexplainable happened. Another time, I wasn't alone when it did. It was the middle of the day. My sister and I sat in the living room watching TV when we heard footsteps coming from the kitchen. Heavy, deliberate, like our father's. They stopped right at the entrance to the weight room. We both looked up. Standing there, staring at us, was our father. At least that's what it looked like. I saw what reminded me of a photo negative of him. His figure was there, but something was off. My sister described it differently. To her, it was just a shadow shaped like him. But the real mystery, our father wasn't even home. Some experiences were unnerving. Others, they just terrified me, like the night I was in the bathroom. I had left the door slightly open. There were only 3 of us home, so I didn't think much of it. But after sitting there for about 10 minutes, I happened to glance up through the gap between the door and the frame. Something moved. A shadow, small and quick, darted past in the kitchen. At first, I thought it was my sister. I called her name. No answer. Then the doorknob rattled. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I screamed her name at the top of my lungs until she came running. She was alarmed, so was my dad. I must have sounded terrified. When I explained what I saw, she looked confused. I wasn't even in the kitchen yet. Later, My mother told me the spirit of a little boy liked to mess with the bathroom door, slamming it shut if it was left slightly open. There were other things too, shadows flickering in my peripheral vision, gone the moment I turned my head, hearing my name whispered when no one was around, the sound of the back door opening, followed by footsteps, always when I was alone. But every time I checked, the door was still locked. Once I was so convinced someone had entered the house that I grabbed my brother's baseball bat and searched every room. Nothing. And yet, when I looked outside, I saw someone who looked like my brother, running down the driveway. I ran to the front window, expecting to see him. There was no one. When my real brother got home an hour later, I asked if he had come back earlier. He shook his head. I just got here, straight from school. I never liked being home alone. Looking back, I wonder if all those spirits, whoever they were, have finally moved on, or if they're still there, watching, waiting for the next person to notice them. Back in the 80s, I was in my early 20s and a bit of a party girl. I loved to go out on the weekends, dance, and have fun with my friends. Nothing wrong with that, right? At that time, I lived with my sister Lucille in Whittier, near Washington Boulevard and Broadway. Most weekends, I'd come home pretty buzzed, go straight to bed, and pass out. But it was during these late nights that I started to experience some strange things. My niece, who was 5 at the time, would often hear me talking to people, laughing, or even crying. She thought I was on the phone and didn't really think much of it. After all, she was just a little kid. The weird part is, I'd hear voices too and even remember talking to someone. Many times, I just thought it was the alcohol messing with my mind. Like when you get that deep sleep after a night of drinking. But I wasn't dreaming. I could clearly hear voices, and I could hear myself talking. There were times when I'd wake up, eyes open, but couldn't move. I'd see someone walking down the hallway toward me, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't scream or move a muscle. And it wasn't like I was dreaming. There was light in my room and throughout the house. It was real. One morning, I woke up to a completely bizarre experience. I felt like someone was, making love to me. I could feel it happening, the endorphin rush. It felt so real. And let me tell you, it was terrifying. This wasn't just happening after a night of partying. It happened on normal nights too, after work, when I was sober. My 5-year-old niece once told me she saw a figure standing at her doorway, watching her. She got so scared, she hid under the covers and fell asleep. In the morning, she was drenched in sweat, but she was fine. She thought it was me, but I had already been in bed. To this day, she still swears she saw someone that night. One day, I was staring at the wood paneling in my bedroom when I thought I saw faces, demonic faces, staring at me. Now, wood paneling can be a little trippy, like clouds where you can see different shapes, but these were real, terrifying faces. I told my sister about it, and she asked me to keep quiet because she didn't want to scare my niece. We ended up taking the wood paneling down and painting the walls instead. Fast forward to 2003. I was living with my sister Rose in Sun Valley, near Burbank, while she was packing up to move to a new house in Whittier. One Saturday morning, I woke up feeling tired and irritable. I didn't feel like doing anything, certainly not packing or cleaning. I told Rose I wasn't feeling well, so she left me alone, but I could tell she was a little frustrated with me. I laid down on the bed around 10:30 a.m., just wanting to rest. But suddenly, I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even think clearly. The only thing I could do was hear, and I heard 2 voices. A woman's voice, cold and demonic, said, "We should have never let you get away from us." Then a man's voice, just as dark, said, "This time you will not get away from us." I was terrified, struggling to move, to call out to Rose. I could feel my mouth moving, but no sound came out. It felt like an eternity. Finally, the pressure lifted, and I was able to get up. I ran downstairs and asked Rose if she could hear me calling her. She said no. When I told her what had happened, she just said, "Why didn't you pray to God?" I told her I was too scared to think clearly. To this day, I wonder who those voices were. What did they mean by "we should have never let you get away from us"? Were they the same forces that tormented me when I lived at Lucille's house back in 1989? What's odd is that I had never heard a female voice before. Back then, it was always male voices. Now, in 2007, I still experience sleep paralysis every now and then, but I've learned how to handle it. In my dreams, I actually talk back to the demons attacking me, almost like I'm a superhero. I rebuke them in the name of Jesus Christ, and it works. They always flee. If you're going through something like this, I recommend you try it too. I've noticed that many people try to fight off the demons or scream, but that doesn't work. The power of rebuke in Jesus' name is real. There's one thing I'll never forget. One time, during sleep paralysis, I couldn't remember the word rebuke, and I couldn't get rid of the demons. I was too scared, so I just weakly told them to leave me alone. Of course that didn't work. They kept pressing down harder. Afterward, I felt drained, physically and mentally. But these days, they seem to have left me alone for the most part, and I'm at peace. A few months ago, something strange happened. I was sleeping on a day bed, and one morning, I woke up a little earlier than usual. I got up to turn off my alarm before it went off, and then I lay back down. I scooted all the way to the bottom of the bed so my feet were resting on the metal frame. I fell back to sleep, but then something, or someone, whacked my feet. It was hard, like a mother figure smacking you to get you up. It startled me so much that I woke up. I looked around, thinking my mom had come in, but I was alone. I know I felt it. My whole body shook. And what was even stranger is that it happened exactly at 6 a.m., the usual time I get up. My 3 cats were sleeping with me, but they didn't react at all. This didn't feel like an evil presence. In fact, it felt like a caring spirit, almost like a guardian angel giving me a nudge. Now I live at home with my mom again, back at my old room. Nothing strange has happened here except for that one whack. I'm not a regular churchgoer, but I have a strong faith in God, and I know that faith protects me like armor. I also know that demons tend to target those who are suffering, like with depression. I've always felt like there's some kind of power struggle for my soul, but I'm ready now. I know how to fight back, and I hope that if you're going through something similar, you remember the power of the words, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus Christ." It works. Trust me, they will flee. I grew up in a haunted house. My parents moved in before I was born, and they still live there. My mother hears doors closing all day long, even though no doors actually move. Strange sounds are a constant presence. I've always felt something watching me, a presence that was never quite visible but always there. I don't know if it was one spirit or many. Sometimes I would feel something touch me, hands, or sometimes something cylindrical and heavy, like a bar rolling across my skin. These experiences didn't just happen while I was asleep. I was awake more than once when I felt it. One time, I was sitting in the den watching TV when I felt that same bar slowly rolling back and forth along my leg. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. We all had our own experiences, though my sister never believed in any of it. My mother, on the other hand, felt things too. Sometimes at night, she would feel something move on the bed. There were nights when she swore she felt a presence pressing down on her, as if someone was holding her in place. She told me she still hears strange noises, always coming from the other end of the house. We never saw anything clear, just the fleeting shapes in the corners of our eyes. I started calling the ghost Sam, mostly because I didn't know anyone by that name, and it felt less frightening to give it an identity. One night, as I was falling asleep, I heard a stack of my papers crash to the floor. I didn't even turn to look. I just muttered, "Sam, I didn't do that, and I'm not picking it up." Then I rolled over and went to sleep. In the morning, there were no papers on the floor. Most of the time, Sam just made noises. Our kitchen had a tile countertop, and we used plastic cups. The sound of those cups sliding across the counter was distinct, loud enough to be heard from the other end of the house. At night, when everything was silent, I would hear them moving, scraping softly against the tile. The kitchen chairs would shift against the floor as if someone was pulling them out and pushing them back in. My parents once heard the unmistakable sounds of the wood-burning stove being opened. The poker lifted from its holder, the fire being stirred, the poker set back into place, the stove door closing again. These are specific sounds, impossible to mistake for anything else. My parents, both logical, educated people, heard it. They thought I had snuck out of bed to watch TV, but when they checked, I was sound asleep. The basement always had a heavy, unwelcoming energy. People who had never even heard our stories felt it. During my sister's sleepovers, when there were too many girls to sleep upstairs, they camped out in the basement. They would whisper to each other about how creepy it felt before anyone even had a chance to start telling ghost stories. I don't think Sam was evil. There were times when I would be home alone, feeling scared, and I would talk to him. I would ask him not to frighten me with noises that night, and when I did, the house would be silent until morning. But sometimes I felt something different, something worse. I don't know if Sam was the only ghost. There were nights when I felt truly threatened, even if I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was just my fear getting the best of me. Maybe it wasn't. One night, I was yanked from deep sleep by a weight on my shoulders and my side. It felt like a dog standing over me, heavy paws pressing down. For a moment, I thought my old dog had passed away and was saying goodbye. But then fear took over. I couldn't move. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My throat locked up. The pressure wouldn't let up. I struggled, trying to force any sound out. And finally, after what felt like forever, I managed a tiny, broken squeak. The moment I did, the weight disappeared. When I caught my breath and dared to look around, nothing was there. My dog was still alive. I never figured out what it was. I've always been sensitive to things I can't explain. I sometimes know things before I have any way of knowing them. I've had dreams that come true. Certain places, certain moments will make my skin crawl before I even realize why. I don't know if it's a gift or a curse, but I know I felt something in that house. It was real. Movies like the Amityville Horror terrified me, not because they were stories, but because they felt too close to what I already knew. I never touched a Ouija board again after my sister used one in my room once. I wanted nothing to do with it. My sister, who never experienced anything herself, insists I must have imagined it all. Not that I was lying, but that I had convinced myself these things were real, the way a hypochondriac can make themselves tick. I told her I think I'm just more sensitive. My mother and I had similar experiences, yet we never spoke about them much. We never sat down and pieced it together until I was older. Tonight, while talking with her about it, I learned for the first time that she had felt the same pressure holding her down in bed. My sister admitted she had felt something similar before, but she brushed it off as some kind of nerve reaction. I told her that maybe, just maybe, that was possible. But nerves don't explain the noises that went on for years. They don't explain the distinct sounds of chairs scraping, glasses sliding, doors closing, or fires being stirred. I tried to rationalize the things I saw as a child. I told myself the shifting shapes in the hall were just the way shadows play tricks in the dark, that my imagination had filled in the blanks. But then I remember all the times it happened in broad daylight, and I know without a doubt that I wasn't imagining it. I was 8 years old when my mom and dad bought a house in Burlingame, California. They were excited about the great deal they got on it and the town's charm. I still remember the first time I stepped inside the house. I looked around and said, "It's so dark in here." My mom assured me that with a little paint and some new curtains, the house would be bright and sunny. But looking back, I think the darkness I felt wasn't just because of the walls and the curtains. There was something hidden, something deeper within the house. Something that didn't stay hidden for long. Before we moved our stuff in, my dad and his friend Dick went over to refinish the hardwood floors. They weren't prepared for what happened next. When they turned on the sander, the radio blasted to life. When they turned the radio off, the lights flickered on. Then just as quickly, the power would shut off completely. They checked the fuses, but nothing was burned out. Dad called the power company and a technician came out. He said everything seemed fine with the connection from the power pole to the house. The technician suggested calling an electrician. When the electrician arrived, he witnessed the strange behavior of the lights and appliances himself. He told my dad that the house needed to be rewired. But just as quickly as the problems had started, everything returned to normal. The lights and appliances worked as they should. It was as if the house had decided to give us a break. But this was just the beginning. Over the years, the strange power surges would come and go with no real explanation. Once we moved in, it didn't take long to notice other odd things happening. Sometimes it sounded like someone was walking across the floor, or there would be knocking on doors in the house. The back door would open and slam shut on its own. Sometimes we'd hear footsteps coming up the stairs, but when we looked, no one was there. My parents tried to explain it away. They said the sounds were just the house settling. But at night, things got stranger. I'd often hear heavy breathing right next to my face, but when I looked around, there was no one there. My mom told me it was the sound of the water heater, but it didn't feel like the water heater. It felt wrong. One day, I found long auburn hairs on my bed. I didn't know anyone with auburn hair. I couldn't understand how they kept showing up. The neighbors told my parents that we were lucky to be living in the house longer than most. They mentioned that the house had always been sold, but no family ever stayed for long, usually just a few months. My parents didn't think much of it at the time, but it stuck with me. There were nights when I woke up, and it felt like someone was holding onto my ankles, pulling me off the bed. I would scream, and my parents would assure me it was just a bad dream, but I wasn't sure. In the mornings, I would find pieces of my hair cut off, short, jagged pieces that I couldn't explain. My mom said it was from the pin curls I use, but I knew something wasn't right. One afternoon, while I was in my room, I felt a cold chill, like someone was watching me. It made my skin crawl. I couldn't shake the feeling, so I decided to leave the room. As I stepped out of my room, I turned off the light. That's when I saw her. A woman, sitting on the bed where I had just been. She had long auburn hair, and her body was faint, almost transparent. She was a ghost. I couldn't believe it. I had never believed in ghosts before, but now I was face to face with one. I ran to the front bathroom, slamming the door behind me, but then I realized if she was a ghost, she could probably walk right through the wall. I panicked and unlocked the door, then rushed into the living room. The next morning, I told my parents what had happened. They exchanged glances and told me that they knew the house was haunted. The ghost I described was one they had named Florence. It took them a while to admit it. They had spent years trying to find the source of all the noises, but never found anything. Then, one night, just as they were about to get into bed, they saw two floating heads staring at them. That was when they knew this wasn't just their imagination. Things started to escalate. They used an Ouija board to try to communicate with the spirits. Now, looking back, I realized that this probably made things worse. I didn't see many ghosts, but my parents did. They witnessed things that I couldn't explain. One time, while my mom was taking a nap on the couch, the entire couch began to shake. She woke up to find that it was moving across the room with her on it. There were things we couldn't explain away, like the sliding door between the second and third bedrooms. That door would often slam open or closed, and no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't get it to stop. There were nights when I'd wake up to screams coming from my room. My parents would rush in, but I wouldn't know why I had been screaming. They would describe it as if I had seen bloody heads rolling across the floor. At times, my parents seemed different, more harsh than usual. It wasn't like them, and I could see it in their eyes. I could tell something wasn't right. One day, before my mom passed away, she told me that the change in her life had made her strange. She told me that she had to fight the urge to attack and strangle a neighbor during a chat across the fence. I told her, "Mom, it wasn't the change of life. It was the ghosts." I had my own experiences with the spirits. I was pushed and manhandled by them. I told my parents, but they brushed it off, telling me it was just my imagination. Family and friends who visited our house also had their own experiences. They'd hear footsteps, or doors would knock, or blankets would be pulled off them while they slept. One day, my aunt came to visit for my birthday. It was too late for her to drive home, but she didn't want to stay in the house. She ended up sleeping out in the travel trailer with my teenage friends. I remember watching TV one night when two ghost hunters, Hans Holzer and Sybil Leek, were visiting San Francisco. They offered to come out and help people if they thought their house was haunted. I begged my parents to call them. They didn't want to, though. They didn't want anyone to know about the house. They were afraid it would lower the property value when it came time to sell. When my parents retired and put the house on the market, the ghosts became more active. We had lived there for 15 years, and it seemed like the ghosts were happy with the arrangement. My dad even said he wanted to move into the travel trailer so they wouldn't have to worry about constantly cleaning up for the realtors coming by. One morning, my dad announced that he was lowering the price of the house. We tried to talk him out of it, but he didn't listen. That same day, the house sold. As my mom and I sat in the kitchen, we heard the back door open and slam shut. Then we heard footsteps coming up the stairs, but no one was there. We looked down the hall, but no one was visible. After the new owners moved in and my parents left for good, my dad confided in me about his experience. The night before they moved out, he was woken up by a hand over his mouth and nose. It was the ghost we had come to call Dave. My dad said it took all of his strength to break free. He apologized for not believing me before. We heard that the first tenant in the house was a minister. I thought maybe the minister could get rid of the ghosts, but he moved out almost immediately. After a series of short-term renters, the house was replaced by an apartment building. The neighbors told my parents that the house was moved, but I'm not sure if that's true. And if it was moved, I often wonder if the ghosts followed. Either way, I know one thing. I would never want to go back and find out for myself. When I was in the 4th grade, my family moved into a house in Cypress, California. From the outside, it looked like any other house on the block. But inside, it was different. There was something off about it. The upstairs, for example, had been altered by the previous owners. What was once 4 bedrooms was now one large open loft. But there was something else about the house, something that only us kids seemed to notice at first. On our very first day moving in, we were unpacking when something strange happened. There was a spice rack sitting at the back of the kitchen counter. Suddenly, it slid across the counter, and before we knew it, it went right over the edge and crashed to the floor. We tried to tell our parents, but they didn't believe us. They thought one of us must have done it by accident. But as the days went by, other things started happening, and this time, it wasn't just us kids who noticed. The clock in the kitchen would sometimes jump off the wall and land on top of the refrigerator, 3 feet away from where it had been. It never hit the ground. The TV and stereo would turn on by themselves, always tuned to a static-filled station. And there were the strange scratching noises on the east side of the house, yet there were no bushes or trees over there that could explain it. My little sister and I would often hear footsteps or movement coming from the upstairs closet when no one else was up there. But my parents just brushed it off as our imagination. That was until one night things got really unsettling. My sister Kina and I, along with 2 of our other sisters, were in her part of the loft watching TV. We started to hear music coming from the other side of the loft, where my other 2 sisters' beds were. At first, we thought it was one of their music boxes, but it sounded strange, like it was playing on its own. My sisters went to check it out, and that's when it happened. From outside Kina's window, a voice whispered her name, over and over again. The voice was scratchy, almost like it was coming from far away. By the time it called her name for the 3rd time, we were already rushing down the stairs. My other 2 sisters were right behind us, running too. By the time we got to the music boxes, the music had stopped. We ran straight to our dad, and after we told him what had happened, he decided to check it out himself. We all followed him up the stairs, moving quietly as a group. But when he opened the curtains, the silence was deafening. The window was marked with 2 smeared handprints on the outside, and hanging from the roof beam was a noose. My dad immediately thought someone had tried to break into the house. He called the police. When they arrived, they searched the house and the area around it but found nothing. They told my dad that no one could have gotten to that side of the house from the outside. The only way to reach that window was from inside the house. That's when the officers told my dad the history of the house. Apparently, the previous owners had a teenage daughter. One day, when they came home early, they discovered her body hanging from a noose, right outside that very window. The officers also mentioned that they found 2 smeared handprints on the outside of the window, just like we had. That was all my dad needed to hear. We moved out of that house that week, realizing the ghost of the teenage girl was still there, and she didn't want any other children living in that house. From time to time, I pass by that house in Cyprus. I always get the feeling that something is watching me from inside, and to this day, whenever I hear a sound outside my window, I hesitate to look, wondering if something, or someone, is looking back. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Back in 1993, I found myself living in Santa Barbara, unexpectedly unemployed. After months of unsuccessfully searching for work, I started going to the local temp agencies to see if I could find something short-term. But out of the 7 agencies in town, 6 of them turned me down immediately, saying I was overqualified for any of the positions they had available. It was frustrating until I got to the 7th one. Not only did they take me on, but they also actually got me a job, which turned out to be pretty unusual for a temp agency. It was later that I learned this place was run by 2 women who were both incredibly psychic, and many of their staff had similar abilities. One of the girls I worked with became a close friend of mine. She was very strong in her psychic abilities. She could tell me exactly what I'd had for breakfast that morning or what mail I would find at home later. It was pretty freaky, but at the time, I thought it was cool and intriguing. I was also heavily into using a Ouija board at the time. Now I know just how dangerous that can be, and my friend, being a psychic, used one quite often too. She had a beautiful, round, wooden Ouija board, handcrafted and decorated with intricate designs. It was more of an art piece than a typical board, and we would spend hours together, communicating with whatever spirits decided to show up. Now, here's where it gets a little wild. My friend shared a very intense story with me about her past lives. She claimed that in every incarnation, she had always been killed by an evil spirit who was jealous of her bond with her soulmate. Apparently, in each of her past lives, she had been murdered with the same jeweled dagger. In her current life, she believed she had already identified this soulmate and the evil spirit, who was now married to her soulmate in this life. She even had a photograph of the 2 of them, with the woman wearing the jeweled dagger tucked into her belt. It was hard for me to fully comprehend at the time, but it gave me chills. One night, we were using the Ouija board again, this time communicating with her guardian angel. But out of nowhere, an evil spirit hijacked the board and started swearing at us, threatening us. At that point, we decided to close things up and call it a night. It was about 2 a.m., and as I walked out the door, I felt a sudden rush of cold air around me, and then, suddenly, a loud scream rang in my ear. It was like someone had run past me, screaming, and the volume of the sound would change. Low, then loud, then low again. I spun around, but there was no one there. I was freaked out but quickly went back inside. When we reopened the board, I asked the guardian angel to confirm what I had just heard. The response was chilling. "Don't help her, you jerk." That sent me into full-on panic mode. I was terrified, thinking that now this evil spirit was coming after me. My friend reassured me and said she would ask her guardian angel to accompany me home for protection. I wasn't sure how much I believed that, but I agreed, feeling too scared to do anything else. As I got into my car and started driving home, I didn't expect much, but as I was cruising down the freeway, something completely surreal happened. Sitting in the passenger seat of my car, solid as could be, was a man. He was about 35 with blonde hair, wearing a red plaid shirt and blue jeans. He smiled at me, waved, and then disappeared. I couldn't believe my eyes, but I felt a sudden calm wash over me. I thought, wow, he did follow me home. When I got back to my apartment, I was still a little shaken, but there he was again, sitting cross-legged on the hood of my car, smiling and waving. Then, the next morning, as I was taking a shower, something even stranger happened. 2 eyeballs appeared in the wall of my shower, looked around, and then disappeared. I was completely freaked out, mostly because I was naked in the shower at the time. But I assumed these eyeballs belonged to my friend's guardian angel. Despite all of this, nothing bad ever happened to me in relation to the evil spirit. I never saw the man in the red plaid shirt again. But even though people have asked me, weren't you scared when he appeared in your car while you were driving 70 miles per hour? I never felt afraid. In fact, every time he showed up, a sense of peace and calm would settle over me, and I knew that I was safe with him. It was definitely one of the most interesting, surreal experiences I've ever had. I once lived in an old store in Pueblo, Colorado. The building had a strange feeling to it, something that wasn't easy to explain. My girlfriend's mom owned a religious store, and she also rented the building next door for storage. Since there were small storefronts, she needed both spaces to make it work. At the time, my girlfriend and I needed somewhere to stay, so her mom offered us the back apartment of the storage side. It had been neglected for a while, and there was a lot of clutter, but after some cleaning, we turned it into a cozy little space. Living there had its awkward moments. It was a business district, so there were occasional homeless people wandering the alley behind the store, but we managed. What was strange, though, was the feeling of a cold breeze or a force that would brush past you from time to time. It wasn't frightening, but it definitely caught your attention. We figured it was just a ghost or something similar. With the religious items filling the front of the store, we thought maybe they provided some kind of protection. One thing that stood out was that customers who came in always seemed to be looking for protection items, and this happened at the same time on a regular basis. I even came up with a theory that maybe ghosts traveled through the sewer lines beneath the building. So, to test this idea, we decided to exorcise the toilet when it started clogging for no apparent reason. We performed a little exorcism on it, and oddly enough, it seemed to work. The toilet stopped clogging for a while, though it did happen again a couple of times. Each time, we did the same thing, and it would flush just fine. I still wonder if it was just a coincidence. The store itself had a simple layout: the front area with the religious items, a small bathroom, then an office area that led to the living room. There was a kitchen to the right and at the back, a bedroom with its own bathroom. One evening, after being out for a while, I came back inside and walked into the living room. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a woman peek out from the bathroom, as if she was looking to see who had come in. It felt like she was about to take a bath. With her red hair, and from the way she peeked around the door, she had to be naked. I looked away for just a second, and when I turned back, she was gone. I checked the bathroom, but there was no one there. I can't explain it. It was like I saw her with my eyes and in my mind all at once. The whole experience felt surreal. There were other nights when we'd wake up feeling restless, as if we needed to go somewhere. So, we would often take long walks around the neighborhood. One of our regular spots was a vacant medical building on a large lot. Later, we learned it was the site of the old St. Mary's Hospital. There was something strange about that place. Businesses never lasted there. Either the building was empty or being repaired. It always felt like something was off, but we couldn't put our finger on it. Still, our walks were peaceful and romantic, and they felt important in some strange way. Eventually, we moved out when the pipes burst during the winter. My girlfriend's mom was opening a restaurant, so it was time for us to find a new place to live. Years later, now married with a son, we moved just a mile away. One day, my wife had an urge to stop by the liquor store across the alley from the old building. I waited outside while she went in. She ended up talking to an older worker who'd been there for years. The worker told her that the elderly lady who owned the liquor store had passed away, and her daughter was getting ready to retire. They talked about how my wife's mom had closed her store and started the restaurant. Then the worker asked if she knew that the owner of the liquor store had actually owned our old building before it moved. Apparently, The building used to be the location of the liquor store, but even before that, it had been a speakeasy. The worker mentioned that a red-headed woman had died there. As my wife told me about the conversation, it all started to make sense. Behind the store, there was a boarded-up section with 2 stories and a few rooms. It seemed like the kind of place that might have had a lot of secrets. Could it have been a brothel too? I guess we'll never know. When my wife told me what she learned, it finally gave her an answer to the odd feelings she had always had about that building. She had worked there for 7 years, and the place had always made her uneasy, even though we didn't talk about it much at the time. As for me, I still can't shake the feeling that there was something more to it than just a series of strange coincidences. But who knows? Maybe it was all just in our heads. What do you think? Have you ever had an experience like this? Something that just doesn't quite add up. In January of 2001, I moved into a small studio apartment in an old Victorian-style house in Pueblo, Colorado. The house had 2 one-bedroom apartments on the main floor and a winding staircase leading up to 2 studios upstairs. I quickly became friends with the couple living downstairs. The husband worked on repairs to the apartment across from theirs in exchange for a discount on his rent, so that apartment was empty most of the time. The man who lived across from me was an older Hispanic gentleman, friendly but quiet, and didn't speak much English. Overall, the place was perfect. It was close to my college, and there was a bike trail nearby along the Arkansas River. Upstairs, things felt pretty good. From my window, I could see the murals painted on the levee along the river. One of the murals, a yin-yang design, featured an angel on one side and a demon on the other. At the time, I was taking Tai Chi classes, so it felt like a perfect match. One thing I'd often do as I climbed the stairs to my apartment was spin a little. It felt like there was some kind of energy or resistance in the air, and the spinning made the climb feel smoother, like I was sensing with whatever was there. Looking back, I remember a few strange things happening during my time living there. One afternoon, I was feeling bored, so I drank a couple of shots of Everclear I had bought to make herbal tinctures. Those shots hit me hard, and I ended up blacking out. I didn't remember much, except that I was later told I had spent the night at a bar on Union Street, hanging out with my old roommate's girlfriend. I didn't know who had taken me home, but I woke up in my apartment the next morning, confused and a bit embarrassed. A few weeks later, I answered a knock at my door to find a very drunk man standing there. He thought it was his apartment. I helped him out, still thinking about my wild night. Another strange thing happened when I was talking to the tenant upstairs. He was standing by the door of the vacant apartment across from him, which was open because someone had been working on it. We exchanged pleasantries, and then the old man pointed into the apartment and asked me if I could see the smoke. I didn't understand what he meant, but there was no smoke, and yet it seemed very important to him. I just nodded along, but it didn't make sense. A few months later, I met a girl and asked her to move in with me. After a month, we decided to move into the apartment downstairs, the one across from the old man. The landlord was fine with it and raised the rent, so we spent a day moving in. Everything felt normal until the evening. That's when things started to feel off. We both felt uneasy, like something was wrong. I started to feel like she was going to hurt me, and she said she felt the same way about me. We sat on opposite sides of the couch, just staring at each other, unsure of what was happening. And then, out of nowhere, roaches started coming in under the front door. I mean, a huge swarm. They started crawling up the walls, and some even dropped down from the ceiling. We cleaned the place earlier and hadn't seen anything like this. There were no roaches upstairs. How could it be this bad all of a sudden? We were both freaked out and started praying, burning incense, hoping it would help. It worked for a while, but after 20 minutes or so, the strange feeling would come back. We ended up stepping out onto the side porch to talk, trying to make sense of it all. While we were outside, I noticed a patch of mold on the front window molding. It was about the size of a cigarette pack, but not as thick. My girlfriend didn't notice it though. She was doing most of the cleaning. I also spotted something unsettling. A weird face formed in the wood grain of the front door. It wasn't helping the uneasy feeling we both had. Eventually, we decided to try and get some sleep. The noise from the upstairs tenant didn't help. It sounded like he was using a hanger to unclog a drain or something. All we could hear were odd sounds coming from the pipes. After what felt like forever, we finally managed to drift off. But then, in the middle of the night, I woke up to my girlfriend screaming. When I looked at her, it was like she wasn't even the same person. She told me she couldn't see and that she felt a weight pressing down on her. It was too much. We grabbed our things and left in a hurry, around 3 or 4 in the morning. The next day, we went back to pick up our stuff. I asked my Tai Chi teacher to come by and check the place out, just to see if she felt anything. She agreed that something wasn't right there. Even my girlfriend's mom didn't like it, so she let us move into the empty side of a shop she owned. As we were moving out, we found something that really freaked us out. A cracked egg on the porch, with a baby bird exposed inside. We had been in and out of that door all night, and hadn't noticed it at all. I broke my lease with the landlord and told him he needed to call an exorcist. A few years later, the entire building burned down. Now, there's a community garden where it used to stand. A few years ago, my husband and I moved to southern Colorado for his job. We found a little 2-bedroom apartment in an old house, about 75 years old, located in a small mining town. At first, everything seemed so peaceful. It was a cozy place, with lots of windows and a little fenced-in yard where our dogs could run around. From our apartment, we had a beautiful view of the town and the surrounding mountains. I spent my days unpacking and settling in, while my husband worked long hours and often came home late. I started to get to know the neighbors and a few people from the town. As I explored, I learned more about the history of the area. The town had a wild past, cowboys, saloon girls, and a lot of violence. There was a strange darkness that seemed to hang over the place. As time went on, I began to see this quaint little town in a different light. I would often take walks through the streets, looking for antiques or unique gifts to send to family. While the town wasn't exactly a tourist hotspot, it still attracted people passing through who needed to stop for gas or a meal. One thing I noticed on these walks was that many of the churches were closed or for sale, and a lot of the businesses were boarded up. There were plenty of bars, though, where people seemed to drown their sorrows. Slowly, my idealized view of the town began to slip away. I've always had this strange ability to feel things, even see things that I didn't want to. I'm empathic, which isn't always a gift. I learned to shut it off, especially when it came to the spirit world. It's something I used to embrace, but as a Christian, I tried to block it out. However, this town seemed to bring my senses to life in ways I wasn't prepared for. What started as an interesting adventure quickly became something I wished I could escape from. One cold, sunny day in January, I decided to visit my favorite antique store to break up the monotony of my day. As I walked down the street, I noticed someone ahead of me, walking in the same direction. The person was wearing a dark knee-length coat, and I couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman. The figure turned into the antique store I was heading to, so I thought, great, I'll finally get a chance to chat with someone new and learn more about the town. When I entered the shop, the owner, Mandy, greeted me. I asked about the person I had seen enter just ahead of me, and Mandy's face went pale. She smiled nervously and said there hadn't been anyone else in the store. We stood there for a moment, both a little confused. She then said quietly, "You'll see a lot of that around here," and walked into the back room. It was an odd moment, and we never spoke of it again. A few nights later, I didn't mention this to my husband until something else strange happened. We were relaxing in the living room, watching TV with the dogs, when a strong smell of freshly brewed coffee drifted into the room. Now we both love coffee, but we never drink it at night. I asked my husband if he could smell it, and he couldn't. He was sitting just a few feet away from me. We wondered if it could be coming from the downstairs neighbor's apartment, but that didn't make sense either. We had no shared vent system, just baseboard heat. As we talked, the smell suddenly vanished. I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, It seemed strange. The strange occurrences kept happening. Sometimes I'd smell the scent of a freshly lit cigarette right next to me on the couch. Or I'd hear movement in the bedroom, just down the hall, even though the dogs were with me in the kitchen. I'd check the room, and it was always empty, but the dogs would look at me curiously and wouldn't go in until I did. These little things didn't scare me at first, and the dogs never reacted, so I figured it was all in my head. Then I had a conversation with Ken, our downstairs neighbor, that changed everything. We had to go through his apartment to access the basement, and as we walked down the stairs, I realized Ken had stopped following us. I turned around and saw him standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at me with a fearful expression. My husband and the landlord were further down in the basement, busy with some yard work, so they didn't notice Ken or me. It was then that I felt something I couldn't explain, a sense of being trapped. It felt like I couldn't breathe, like something heavy was pressing on my chest, and I couldn't move. Ken seemed to sense this too, because he came down a few steps, reached out his hand, and helped pull me back upstairs. Once I was out of the basement, I felt better, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. In the kitchen, Ken told me about his own experiences in the apartment. He mentioned things like missing keys, strange noises, and lights that wouldn't work. The basement, especially, was a place he'd avoided. You couldn't pay me enough to go down there, he said. It wasn't long before he revealed that his girlfriend wouldn't visit him anymore because she was so scared of the place. Soon after that, Ken left without a trace. There were no moving trucks, no signs that he was packing up. When I asked the landlord, he said that Ken had decided to move home. That left us as the only tenants in the house. I felt more isolated than ever. Despite the unsettling things happening around me, I stuck to my usual bedtime routine. Let the dogs out, brush my teeth, check the locks, and get into bed. But for weeks, I always felt like someone was watching me, especially when I passed the open pantry or the narrow hallway leading to the bedroom. Every night, my eyes were drawn to the bedroom door, always with the feeling that something, or someone, was standing in that shadowy hallway watching. One night, the feeling became overwhelming. It was the first time I actually spoke to it, saying, "You are not welcome here. Leave now." I walked to the bedroom door and closed it, calling the dogs up on the bed and praying. When I did, the air in the room grew heavy with anger. I could feel it, a deep, burning rage. I prayed harder, invoking the name of Jesus over the house. As I prayed, the energy shifted, and the fear that had been suffocating me began to lift. But the dogs were still on alert, staring at the door. The next morning, things felt normal again. But that night, everything changed. My husband had been away for a few days, and when he returned, something felt off between us. We started to argue, and I felt like I wasn't talking to the man I knew. His eyes were cold, the atmosphere around him dark and distant. The argument ended with me backing down, but deep inside, I knew something wasn't right. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I drifted off to sleep, but then something terrifying happened. I was in a strange, dreamlike state. Above me, a dark mass was swirling, pressing in. I could see the darkness blocking out the light from the windows. I couldn't breathe, and the pain in my chest was unbearable. It felt like something was trying to crush me from the inside out. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. In that moment, I called out to Jesus in my mind, rebuking the presence. I prayed harder than I ever had before, commanding whatever it was to leave. Finally, I was able to yell, "In the name of Jesus, you are not welcome here." At that moment, my husband jumped up, grabbing his gun, and the dogs were at his side, ready to protect us. When he realized no one was there, he came to me, holding me while I sobbed. He didn't remember the argument earlier, nor the strange dark energy that had surrounded him. Shortly after that night, I went away on a work trip. When I returned, my husband had already found a new place for us to live, and we moved out soon after. I've had many paranormal experiences in my life, and I take them seriously. The spirit world isn't something to take lightly, and it's a dangerous place for those who don't know how to protect themselves. I learned a lot from that experience, and I'll never forget the way that house felt, both beautiful and terrifying. as if something was always lurking just out of sight. What do you think? Have you ever experienced anything like this? When I was a little girl, first or second grade, I believe, my family moved to a small farming town in Colorado. I was shy and didn't make many friends at first, but then a girl with reddish-brown hair asked me to play. We quickly became close, and one day, she invited me to spend the night at her place. I was excited and agreed right away. Her family lived in a small apartment complex right across from the school. There were only 4 units, 2 on top and 2 on the bottom, and her parents actually owned the building. Her older sister, who was in her early 20s, lived in the unit below them, and she also had a younger sister who was still in preschool. Not long after I arrived that evening, her parents told us they were going out to the local bar for a few hours. Apparently, this was a regular thing for them. They locked the door behind them and told us that if we needed anything, her sister was downstairs. Before leaving, they gave us the bar's phone number. This was before cell phones, after all. An hour later, her sister left too, saying she was going to pick up a friend and would be back soon. That was the first time I had ever been left alone without an adult, and it made me uneasy. The apartment itself didn't help. Hanging in the middle of the living room was a large painting of a woman. Brandy told me it had been there when they moved in, and her parents liked it, so they left it up. But something about it was unsettling. No matter where I moved, it felt like the woman's eyes followed me. Trying to shake off the feeling, we talked about normal things, school, friends, silly little girl stuff, until a loud, heavy knock echoed through the apartment. We both jumped. It was the kind of knock you'd expect from the police, hard, fast, and demanding. It kept going, one knock after another, unrelenting. We crept to the window, turned on the porch light, and peeked out. No one was there. Trying to calm ourselves, we figured it must have been someone looking for her sister. Maybe they had knocked on the wrong door. We sat back down, still a little shaken, when suddenly the knocking came again, louder this time. This time, when we looked out, the porch light was off, and someone was crouching right outside the window, staring in at us. The face was hard to make out, but the eyes were glowing red. We screamed and ran to the couch, grabbing the phone to call Brandy's parents. The second we picked up the receiver, the knocking stopped. Her parents brushed it off, saying it was probably her sister trying to scare us. A few minutes later, the knocking came again. Then her sister really did come to the door, but this time she was furious. She yelled at us, accusing us of trying to get her in trouble. She had just gotten back and had no idea what we were talking about. That was when fear truly set in. After her sister went back downstairs, Brandy looked at me seriously and said something I'll never forget. "This place is haunted." I laughed nervously, thinking she was just trying to scare me, but she wasn't smiling. She told me she had seen things her whole life, and that strange things happened in the apartment all the time. I was still skeptical, until I saw it for myself. Hanging on the kitchen wall were 2 old-fashioned wooden utensils, a giant fork and spoon, the kind people used to decorate their homes with back then. Right in front of us, they flew off the wall. Not just fell, flew. Straight across the room. I was frozen in fear. The only thing I could think to do was call her parents again. This time, they came home. By then, I was desperate to leave, but they had been drinking and couldn't drive me home. I had no choice but to stay the night. Later, as we got ready for bed, I had to use the bathroom. I stepped into the hallway, still feeling on edge, when I heard something. A child crying. Soft at first, but unmistakable. Then just ahead of me, I saw him. A little boy, no older than 3, standing there in the hallway, tears running down his face. Before I could react, he turned and ran, straight into the closet. Not into it. Through it. That was it. I called my parents and begged them to come get me. Later, I found out the terrible truth. Years before, a 3-year-old boy had died in that very apartment. His mother had abandoned him, leaving him alone without food, heat, or anyone to care for him. No one came for him. Scared and alone, he had hidden in the closet. And that's where he died. After that night, I never stayed at Brandy's apartment again. A few years later, when she was in middle school, her family moved away, and we lost touch. One day, I found her number and decided to call. She told me the hauntings had never stopped. In fact, they had only gotten worse. She said whatever was there felt evil. Her parents had even tried to have an exorcism performed. I never found out what happened after that. Brandy and I lost touch for good. But I still think about that night, and I will never forget what I saw. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. Ever since I was little, I've always felt like I was being watched, like I was never truly alone. Over the years, that feeling has only gotten worse. For as long as I can remember, I've seen a woman in a long white dress around my house. My mom thinks it could be my grandmother. She passed away from an exploding blood vessel in her brain, something the doctors couldn't stop. It was a slow and painful death. My mom tells me I'm a lot like her, which is strange because I never got to meet her. She died exactly 1 year and 1 day before I was born. That still shocks me, but I've never seen the woman's face, so I can't be sure it's her. A few months ago, I started seeing a little boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old. He never stood out in the open, always staying just behind something, as if he was hiding. One night, my dogs started barking at the porch door, so I took a picture, thinking maybe they had spotted something outside. When I examined the photo, I saw him. In the bottom right corner of the window, a little boy's face stared back at me, pale skin, short black hair, and sad blue eyes. Then, after my pregnant aunt moved in, my family started hearing something new, a baby crying. The sound came from the storage room next to our bedrooms, always faint but unmistakable. My grandpa once told me that when he was a boy, the house next door had belonged to a doctor, and supposedly, a few people had died there. I don't know what to believe, but the worst started after my 15th birthday. That's when I began seeing something else. A tall shadow figure. It doesn't matter where I go, it's always there. I'll be out on a date with my boyfriend and catch sight of it in the corner of the room, just standing there watching. When I see it in a crowded place like Walmart, that's when the fear really sets in. At my boyfriend's house, I see it lingering in the lower den or on the stairway. He jokes about spotting it near the highway on our drives home, but I know he doesn't actually see it. I wanted to believe I was just paranoid, that maybe I was imagining things. But a few nights ago it proved me wrong. It attacked me. I was lying in bed when I heard it, scratching sounds coming from the storage room across my room. At first, I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just the house settling or my imagination playing tricks on me. But then I saw something move, a black shape. I turned my head to look, and the moment my eyes landed on it, I was attacked. Something grabbed my ankle and yanked me off my bed. Before I could react, I was being dragged across the floor. My legs started going numb, but I fought back, kicking, clawing, anything to break free. Then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. I was so terrified that I slept on the porch with my dogs just to feel safer. The next morning, while changing, I saw them, bruises. From my ankle to my knee, my right leg was covered in dark bruises. They're almost faded now, but I don't feel safe in my own room anymore. I don't know what it is, and I don't know what it wants. But I know one thing for sure. It's real. I've had something following me for as long as I can remember. At first, it was just a feeling, a presence that I couldn't explain. But as I grew older, things started to get worse. I was 11 years old when I had my first real encounter with this thing. It was late one night when I decided to get a drink. As I sat up in bed, I opened my eyes, and that's when I saw them. My bed was surrounded by bugs, cockroaches, spiders, all sorts of things. I was frozen with fear, unable to move or scream for help. I couldn't understand it. It felt so real, yet I was too scared to do anything. This wasn't a one-time thing either. It happened over and over again. Every time it would happen, I'd finally jump out of bed, run to the bathroom, wash my face, and grab something to try and kill the bugs. But when I went back to my room, they were always gone. The next morning, I'd tell my mom, but she'd just say it was a dream, even though I was wide awake. In 2007, we moved from Colorado to Ohio. We settled into a nice house in Gahanna, a peaceful neighborhood. The moment I stepped inside, I felt something pulling me toward the house. It felt wrong, like something was off about it. I told my parents, but they just brushed it off like they always did. After a week, everything seemed fine again, and even my dreams stopped. I thought maybe the move had worked, that I was free of whatever had been following me. But things weren't over yet. One evening around 8 p.m., the whole family was downstairs, enjoying some time together. That's when my mom's phone rang upstairs. I was 12 at the time, the oldest of 4 kids, and my mom asked me to get it for her. I got up and started heading upstairs. As I climbed the stairs, I felt something, like a force pressing down on me, making it hard to move. I struggled, but I managed to reach the top. My parents' room was right there, so I walked in and grabbed the phone. But as I did, I felt it, like someone was watching me. I turned around, and there it was, a shadowy figure standing in the doorway. I froze, too scared to move. Then, just as fast as it appeared, it ran down the hall and into my room. I couldn't get downstairs fast enough. Later that night, I told my dad about it and asked if I could sleep with my twin brother. I was older than him by just 5 minutes, but that night, I needed him. I tried to tell my parents and siblings about the ghost, but they didn't believe me. That is, until one day, when my siblings saw what I had seen. We were all in my twin's room, playing a game. The door was wide open, and that's when we saw it. A flash of shadow passed across the hall, right into my room. "Guides, look, he just passed," I said, pointing. They all turned, and their faces went pale. We watched as the shadow stopped in the doorway, staring back at us. We screamed, and our mom came rushing in, but by the time she got there, the shadow had disappeared into my room. Growing up in a Muslim family, we believed in jinn, unseen creatures created before humans. Some of them are good, some are bad. Everyone has a jinn companion, a sort of inner voice that guides decisions. My mom told us that the shadow we were seeing was just our jinn, watching over us. We called him Adi, and for a while, we believed that he was there to protect us. But as I got older, I started seeing more. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. One day, I was in my parents' room, looking for something in their cabinet. I glanced up and saw something behind me through the mirror. It was an old man with a hat. I felt like I was in a trance, and when I turned around, he was gone. But when I looked back in the mirror, I saw blood on my hands, though I hadn't been bleeding. And then, just as I started to panic, the man appeared again, this time right behind me. He opened his mouth, and as he did, the mirror cracked. I screamed, and my parents rushed in to find the blood, the cracked mirror, and the words, "I am not Adi." My parents took me to an Islamic preacher, hoping for an exorcism. I told them I wasn't possessed, but they didn't believe me. They had the house blessed, but the dreams got worse. The entity became more physical. Sometimes I'd wake up to feel someone choking me, and there would be hand imprints on my neck. I showed my mom, but she didn't know what to do. In the end, they decided to take me to Africa for a stronger exorcism. Now I'm 20, and the dreams have stopped. I'm not scared anymore. In fact, I think I want to talk to him, figure out what he's trying to tell me. I still see him from time to time, but not as much as before. I don't know what he is or what he wants, but I've started to think that maybe it's not about fear anymore. Maybe it's just about understanding. In 1976, my grandparents moved their family to a small house in the middle of nowhere in northeast Colorado, about an hour's drive to the nearest town. My mom was 16 at the time and not happy about the move. As soon as she finished high school, she moved out, married my dad, and went on with her life. She always said the Atwood house gave her the creeps, and she couldn't wait to leave. Grandma and Grandpa didn't move to town until around 2005, when Grandpa sold the farm and cattle. When they finally moved into town, their new house felt different. It didn't have the same eerie vibe as the country house, and I found that strange. It was just a normal house, with nothing unusual about it. But that made me think about the house and the country more. Suddenly, I had a lot of questions about it. There was something unique about the feeling of the Atwood house. Every summer, we drive to Colorado to visit my dad's parents in the mountains and my mom's parents on the prairie. As soon as we turned the corner and the country house came into view, my stomach would knot up, and I'd feel a cold, uncomfortable sensation. I always thought it was just the excitement of seeing them, but no matter how long I stayed there, the same feeling would hit me every time. Even if my dad, grandpa, or a cousin was driving, that unsettling feeling would wash over me when we reached the house. It felt like the entire place was soaked in loneliness, a loneliness I couldn't explain. I thought maybe it was just because my grandparents were getting older, but now I wonder if it was something else entirely. When they first moved in, the house was tiny and very old, just 3 rooms. Grandpa and my uncle knocked out the east and west walls to add a big kitchen and another living room. There was no real separation between the rooms, just carpet and a few steps that divided them. Grandpa had finished one basement, but there was still an old storm cellar that hadn't been touched. One day, I decided to go down into the storm cellar to look for Grandma. I got about halfway down the stairs when I thought I saw a skeleton doing laundry. Terrified, I ran back upstairs, almost tripping on my way up, though it felt like something had pushed me. I never went down there again, though we often played in the finished basement on the other side of the house. But it wasn't just the basement or the house that got to me. It was the entire property. I'd be sitting at the kitchen table, looking out over the prairie, and suddenly, a deep sadness would hit me, and I'd burst into tears. The same feeling would come over me when I looked out the living room window at the cornfields, or when I went outside to swing or help hang laundry. Even something as simple as burning the trash would leave me feeling empty, as if the wind through the trees carried a sense of despair. This never happened when I was at my aunt's or uncle's houses nearby. There was something about that land that was different, but they all told me strange things happened at their places too. When I was very little, my mom and I lived in a small house next to my grandparents' place. Dad worked in another town, so it was just us. I don't remember much about the house, but I do remember strange dreams. Dreams where skeletons would walk me through the cornfields across the road so I could get a better view of the trees swaying in the wind by the ditch. Even now, thinking about it still gives me the chills. Not long after, Grandpa tore down the house because snakes kept getting into the pipes and hiding in the toilets. The only time I ever saw something strange was when I was older. One night, we were all bunked down in the middle part of the house on the pull-out couch. The front door, which no one ever used, was across from me, and the kitchen sink, with its light on all night so Grandpa wouldn't run into anything when he checked on the cows, was just to my left. That's when it happened. A dark shadow formed right inside the front door. It hadn't been there before. The shadow stood in the light from the kitchen, and I could tell it was masculine. I watched it for a while, and it seemed to nod, as if acknowledging me. It didn't come into the new part of the house, but stayed in the old section. Over the years, I've heard odd stories. Grandpa once told me that he and his brother-in-law had chased a ball of light through the fields. Grandma went missing for about an hour one morning after a bright light surrounded her during a walk to the big tree at 5 a.m. My uncle and his wife had flashing lights wake them up in the middle of the night, and the lights followed them around the house. There were just a lot of strange things happening on that land. No one ever really talked about what happened to Grandma. She once mentioned being surrounded by a light while walking to the big tree about 15 years ago, but after that, she went quiet on the subject. We all wondered which tree she was talking about, because all the trees in the area were the same size. After that, she stopped walking outside at 5 a.m. Grandma and Grandpa were both teachers, and with the farm and cattle to manage, the house was often empty. Looking back, I wonder if there's more to the house and the land than anyone realized. Maybe there's something still lingering out there, something tied to that feeling of sadness, loneliness, and the strange events that happened. What do you think? A little over 2 years ago, I took my young sons and headed out to Colorado for a long visit with my relatives. The first part of the trip was spent at my mother's apartment. We left early in the morning, around 8, and the drive was long, about 11 hours. By the time I arrived, I was exhausted. My mom let me know that I would be bunking with my 5-year-old sister that night, and though she rarely slept in that room, she was looking forward to a sleepover with me and my 2-year-old and 3-month-old sons. My mom's apartment was on the second floor, tucked between several other apartments. The room I was staying in was at the back, on the left side, with no windows or closet. The dining room was right outside my door, and when I opened it, the only thing visible was a small hallway leading to the bathroom. Straight ahead, upon entering the room, was a queen-size bed that took up most of the space, pressed against 3 of the 4 walls. I set up a playpen by the foot of the bed for my youngest, and the infant seat was placed near the door since my older son might squish the baby if they slept together. Later that evening, we said our good nights and everyone settled in. It must have been around 9:00 p.m., and the kids were ready for bed. After reading to them and getting them tucked in, I turned off the light, leaving the fan on. The door was cracked open slightly to let in the air, and a faint light from my mom's TV filtered in from the other room. My sister, who had wanted to sleep closest to the wall, was already resting, and my older son had drifted off peacefully. My youngest, though, was still stirring. I tried to stay awake, knowing that as soon as I relaxed, he'd likely wake up and cry. After a while, everything went quiet. My youngest had fallen asleep too, and I cautiously opened my eyes to check on him. What I saw stopped me cold. Kneeling near my infant's seat was a man, looking down at my baby. One of his hands appeared to be resting gently on the seat. I couldn't believe my eyes. I froze, screaming silently in my mind, willing myself to wake up if I was dreaming. But no, I wasn't asleep. The man turned his head slightly and met my gaze, his stare curious but brief. Then, without warning, he vanished right before my eyes. My heart raced as I quickly sat up and checked on my baby. He was still sleeping soundly, and nothing had changed in the room. No one else seemed to have noticed anything. The feeling in the room wasn't fear, though. It was a strange sense of calm and sleepiness, almost as though the presence wasn't meant to frighten me. I stood there for a moment, unafraid, processing what had just happened. Now I understood why my little sister didn't like sleeping in that room alone. The next day, I told my family about what I'd seen, except my sister, and while they were a little spooked, they didn't seem overly concerned. Over the next 2 years, there were more strange occurrences in the apartment, strange feelings, shadow figures, and one instance when my mom and brothers were sitting around and suddenly a strong wind ripped through the apartment, pulling curtains through the open windows. After that, the strange happenings seemed to stop entirely. Just recently, my mom called me and mentioned an interesting story. A woman had driven up to her apartment in a van and asked if she lived in the apartment behind them. When my mom confirmed, the woman excitedly asked if the ghost was still there. She went on to explain that she had once lived there years ago and was convinced that a man's ghost had lived with her. My mom shared some of the strange things that had happened, but she told the woman she believed whatever presence was there had left after the incident with the wind. After my grandma passed away in 2012, strange things began happening around my uncle's house. One of the oddest occurrences involved a toy, a Mr. Hanky talking bobblehead from South Park. It may sound ridiculous, but something was causing it to go off on its own and drain the batteries. My uncle had never had issues with it before. He'd had the same batteries in it for years without needing to replace them. Now, here's where it gets strange. My dad had to leave for a reunion with his old band. which happened to take place near my uncle's home. My dad stayed with my uncle for the duration of the reunion. Keep in mind, my dad and uncle look very similar. This becomes important later. When my dad returned home, I greeted him and we did all the usual things when someone has been gone for a while. After a few minutes, I went back to my room to write. As I sat there, the lights started flickering wildly. Our house is old, so flickering lights weren't uncommon, but this time it wouldn't stop. Frustrated, I took a picture. What appeared on the camera was something I couldn't explain, a blurry, blob-like shape, partly transparent with a faint blue hue. I wasn't sure if it was just a camera anomaly, but it looked unusual enough to make me wonder. I started screaming "ghost" in panic, which of course alarmed my parents. I showed them the picture. My dad dismissed it, but my mom seemed a little more intrigued. After that, I didn't want to sleep in my room anymore. In fact, I wanted to move into the basement, but my parents wouldn't let me. Reluctantly, I returned to my room and started talking aloud, as if reasoning with the presence that had startled me. It was strange, but I suddenly felt calm, as though I had made some sort of connection, like a friend. A few weeks later, weird things began happening to me and my family. The first incident was mine. I burn incense daily, and I had placed a stick in the holder but didn't light it right away. I went downstairs to talk to my mom, and when I came back up, I noticed that the incense holder and stick had disappeared. I found them on the floor, right side up, with ash scattered everywhere. I called my mom upstairs, assuming she had knocked it over by accident. But when she came up, she said she hadn't touched anything. My bed was still unmade, so she wouldn't have even been near the desk where I had left the incense holder. I realized then that something, or someone, else was responsible. A few incidents happened to my mom next. One morning, my mom got up and found a broken flower pot on the floor, dirt and leaves scattered everywhere. She immediately called my dad, thinking he had knocked it over. He denied it, and then she turned to me, but quickly realized I never opened the curtains in the morning. The flower pot had been near the window. She assumed my dad had done it, but he hadn't been home at the time. Another strange event occurred when my mom was still awake, and she heard an odd noise coming from the Blu-ray player. When she investigated, she found it was on and vibrating, almost as if someone had been shaking it. The odd part, we hadn't used it in ages, so there was no reason for it to be on at all. My dad also had an unusual experience. He was downstairs watching TV when he suddenly felt the urge to go to the garage. He tried to open the door leading to the garage, but the doorknob had fallen off. He was frustrated because he'd have to fix it, but oddly, he didn't seem too alarmed. Something about it felt off though. He brushed it aside, which was unlike him. A month later, my uncle came to stay at our house. He was on vacation, and we thought it would be more convenient for him to stay with us than at a hotel. To me, my uncle is a bit of a ghost expert. We joke around and make fun of ghost adventures together. I showed him the picture I had taken of the flickering lights, and he seemed intrigued by it. He'd gotten similar pictures in the past. While he was staying with us, the activity started to calm down. Once he left, it stopped altogether. This got me thinking. My uncle has had his own share of strange experiences and seems to have some sort of connection with ghosts. Since my dad and uncle look so similar, I believe the ghost might have confused my dad for my uncle and followed him home. Once my uncle arrived at our house, the ghost realized its mistake and returned with him. So my theory is that the haunting was somehow linked to my uncle's house, and when he visited, the ghost followed him back. It all started with small things, doors opening and closing on their own. At first, I brushed it off. After all, we live in military housing on a marine base in Okinawa, Japan, and older buildings can have their quirks. But as time passed, the strange occurrences became harder to ignore. My husband, a skeptic who only believes in what he can see, wasn't convinced. But one night we both heard something we couldn't explain. I had just put our 3 young children to bed, making sure to close all their doors and the one leading to the living room. My husband and I were settled on the couch. watching a movie, when we heard the doorknob rattle. A moment later, the door creaked open. Then, a small, timid voice called out, "Mommy?" I sighed, assuming our 3-year-old daughter, Lisa, had gotten out of bed. I turned, ready to scold her, but the doorway was empty. Confused, I got up, expecting to find her hiding behind the door or running back to her room. Instead, the hallway was still, and all the bedroom doors remained shut. I peeked into Lisa's room. She was sound asleep, tucked in under her blankets, just like her siblings. My stomach tightened as I stepped back into the living room. "Did you just hear something?" I asked my husband. "You mean Lisa calling your name," he replied casually. I felt a chill run down my spine. He had heard it too. After that night, more strange things happened. Sometimes I'd catch movement in the reflection of the steel cabinet in the kitchen. I'd turn around, expecting to see one of the kids or my husband behind me, but there was never anyone there. Other times, I'd hear Lisa's voice calling for me from just a few feet away, only to realize she wasn't even home. The most unsettling moment happened late one night. My husband and I were watching TV when, across the room, I saw something standing in the middle of the floor. A small shadow, a little girl. She was swinging her arms back and forth as if playing by herself. I was frozen, unable to speak, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Then, just as my husband noticed my expression and turned to look, the shadow suddenly shot upward, disappearing into the lamp. I barely slept that night. Since then, I've caught glimpses of a child in the mirror, always at my eye level. And just last weekend, something else happened. We were at a USO on another base, grabbing some food. As I filled our soda cups, I saw a little girl rush past behind me. Assuming it was Lisa, I glanced over, expecting to see her at my side. But when I turned the corner, she was sitting with the rest of the family, nowhere near me. It happened twice more. Each time, I felt sure someone was there, only to turn and find no one. I don't know what to make of it. Is it a ghost or something else? Could it be some kind of projection of Lisa's energy? She has such a strong personality. Maybe it's connected to her in some way. I don't feel afraid. Whatever it is, it doesn't seem threatening. But still, there's something unsettling about seeing someone who isn't really there. What do you think? Have you ever experienced anything like this? The old Strum place sat on a hill 5 miles south of Cornelius, Oregon. Known as the Old Storm Place, it was built by an old German and his family from the old country. It had clapboard siding, painted white, lots of windows. A huge barn sat below the house amid towering cedar, fir, and pine trees that sighed in the wind like the pines in a Kerwood novel. I first saw the house in the last part of 1937. The Depression was still rampant in the land, and so many were out of work. But if you could get out of town and back to the land, there were always nuts, fruit, and berries to work in and put up for the winter at a minimal cost. There were always empty houses or woodcutters' shacks, abandoned because people had left to go elsewhere, or some farmer had bought or leased land and didn't need the house that went with it. Most were not in too bad a shape. Usually, a stove had been left, along with a rough-hewn table, some benches and orange crates nailed to the walls for cupboards. One made out pretty well. No one seemed to be on window-breaking binges, so the windows were usually intact. With flour-stacked curtains, a good floor scrubbing, fire in the stove, and a pot of beans cooking, they were a haven to crawl into, and it felt like home. Most everyone took care of the property and left it as neat or neater than when they moved in. It sure beat a hole-in-the-wall apartment or a tar paper or corrugated shack near the dumps. This district, I believe, was called the Owl Hill District, strictly a German Lutheran community. We sure needed a place to stay. We had a baby girl, and my husband could cut wood if we could find a place to stay. We moved into the old Storm Place after getting permission from Alex Eischen, who owned another farm about 1.5 miles away and farmed this place. We asked about the amount of rent he wanted, but to our amazement, he could hardly keep a grin off his face or the twinkle from his eyes. like he had some secret, and he said he didn't want any rent as we wouldn't be there very long anyway. He said sure, we could live there if we could stand it. Up the road the other way lived a bachelor, a thick-set German, who only laughed when we told him we were moving in and wanted to know how long we were staying. We couldn't figure out what the joke was, but shrugged it all off and moved in. Everyone we saw would say incredulously, "You're moving into the old storm house," and look at us as if we were either too young or too foolish to catch on. We met many with just open stares, embarrassed grins, or just a shake of the head. Evidently, the house was well known. There was my husband and I, our little girl, and a cousin or brother who stayed with us, often by turns, coming to help cut wood for a while. They used one of the old drag saws you now see in museums and were paid $2.50 a cord, cut, delivered, and stacked. This was divided 2 and sometimes 3 ways, but you could keep a few chickens, and the neighbors gave us milk for milking their cow when they had to be gone. The place looked like a castle to us, as we sure needed a place to stay, and we were down to our last nickel, you might say. My husband's cousin had an old car, sometimes put together with baling wire, so we had transportation. Our water came from an old pump by the side of the house, which we had to carry in for drinking, washing, scrubbing floors, cooking, canning, and baths. It had to be heated on the cook stove. The well was a deep one and echoed many sounds, like footsteps walking that never appeared. We dismissed many noises as just the well being what it was. We did begin to hear that no one who ever lived there stayed very long. A cousin of my husband and her family stayed a short time before moving to the North Plains area. Their names were John and Lita Epler. They never would talk about the place but did say no one member of the family stayed alone, and one time Lita was bitten by a rat as she lay in bed with a small baby. They used the bedroom off the front room. While we were there, we hardly ever used the front door or even the front part of the house, as the back door seemed more convenient to the kitchen, woodshed, and all. We began to hear stories, mostly from our bachelor German neighbor, that the Strums had been bootlayers. A man was killed on the stairway leading upstairs, and that there were trap doors in some of the rooms. The bloodstains were still visible on the steps 4 or 5 steps up, and also where the blood spilled on the floor. We did find 3 trap doors that led to nice dugout spaces below the floors. We kept being told after we moved in that no one would ever live there again, but we were young and brave, and who believed in ghosts anyway, and who worries when you're young. We moved in with little or no furniture, using what we could find, and besides, we decided after being around that the other part of the house wasn't needed, and it wasn't a very friendly part anyway. For a while, everything went along all right. Being early summer, we were outdoors a lot, but as it got on toward fall, we began to notice odd noises. The first seemed to be these resounding footsteps that could be heard on the north side of the house where the pump sat. I would run out to meet whoever was there, glad for any company, as the farms were a long way apart in those days, and no one would be there. Since the farms were 2 to 3 miles apart, we couldn't see how the footsteps could echo so. No one seemed to be walking much anyway. The next incident was the sound of someone chopping wood in the woodshed, usually in the afternoons. It would be the sound of measured chopping, and I would dash out, thinking my husband had come home early. If the drag saw was broken down, often his cousin would go to town for parts, and my husband would come home and cut wood for the wood range and heater stove in the dining room. When I'd get to the woodshed, the chopping would stop, then start up again when I got back to the house. I would think he just stepped outside for a minute and go running out again when the chopping started up again. This would go on until it seemed I would wear my legs out. It would last for an hour or so every afternoon, then maybe go weeks before starting up again. Always in the afternoons only. This went on as long as we lived there. We never did figure out an explanation. There were the sound of men's footsteps that went to the stairs where the blood spots were, stopped, and walked on into the living room we used as our front room. This would go on for some time, and then quite a while would pass before he would be back again. He seemed to end his walk at the trap door in the room. That trap door was very active the whole time we lived there. I often wondered if someone was buried there. When my family moved into an old house, people in town warned us that it was haunted. My dad didn't believe in ghosts, so he just laughed it off. We moved in anyway. While picking out my room, I found a small space filled with old photo albums. The pictures were faded, and I didn't recognize anyone in them. Something about them felt off. Not wanting to keep them, I tossed them into the basement and forgot about them. For the first year, everything seemed normal. But then, strange things started happening. At night, I heard creaking sounds even when no one was walking. Sometimes it felt like something, or someone, was pounding on the walls. The noises made me uneasy, so I decided to do some research on the house. At the library, I found something chilling. The house once belonged to a dog trainer who had been killed by one of her own dogs. After that, no one lived there for 7 years. That's when I came across something that stopped me in my tracks. The next people to live there were a couple named Mr. and Mrs. Smith, my great-grandparents. I remembered Nana telling me how my great-grandfather, Papa, had died of a heart attack. But old records suggested something different. Some people believed the dog trainer had something to do with his death. For the next few nights, I struggled to sleep. Then, one night, as I lay in bed, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, steady steps. I held my breath, thinking it was my dad. But when the figure stepped into the dim light, I saw his face. It was Papa. My heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to scream, but before I could, he held up his hand as if to tell me not to be afraid. We stared at each other in silence for what felt like forever. Then, just as quietly as he had appeared, he turned and walked away. The next morning, I woke up thinking it had all been a dream. But then, I noticed something on my dresser. A small charm. I picked it up and felt a chill run down my spine. Inside was a tiny photo of Nana and Papa, and on the front, my Nana's name was engraved. I rushed to Nana's house, my hands trembling as I held out the necklace. As soon as she saw it, she burst into tears. She told me that it had been an anniversary gift from Papa. When he passed and she moved out of the house, she left it behind for him, to keep, to return to. She had never told us about the history of the house because, deep down, she believed he was still there. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about everything that had happened. And then, a strange thought crossed my mind. I wasn't scared anymore. I had been visited by my Papa's spirit, and somehow, I found myself hoping he would come back. Maybe next time, my mom or dad would see him too. I've lived in this house my whole life minus 16 years. My parents have been here even longer, almost 24 years. And for as long as I can remember, there's always been something here. A presence. You can feel it watching you, standing right next to you, even when no one else is around. Being alone in this house is never a good idea. I usually try to ignore the strange noises and unsettling moments, but one experience shook me so much I couldn't just brush it off. It was an ordinary day, nothing unusual about the weather. I was home alone, walking through the living room, when suddenly, boom. The sound was so loud, so forceful, it felt like a massive tree had slammed into the back of the house, only not from above, but from the side. The whole house shook. The windows rattled so hard I thought they had shattered. A screen from a front window even fell off. For a moment, I stood frozen, afraid to move, afraid to even look toward the backyard. I finally worked up the courage to check, but when I stepped outside, there was nothing. No fallen tree, no damage, nothing to explain the noise that had shaken the entire house. That night, the house was quieter than usual. Too quiet. We live in a small country house, tucked away in a private community near Candlewood Lake in New Milford, Connecticut. Over the years, so many strange things have happened here. One time, I had a friend over, and we were in the kitchen grabbing something to eat. On the wall, there's an old, oversized wooden spoon, handmade and antique. We turned to leave, but just as we stepped out, a loud crash echoed behind us. We spun around to see the wooden spoon lie on the floor, only it hadn't just fallen. It had landed almost 10 feet away. My friend started freaking out, but I wasn't surprised. Not anymore. My brother has his own stories too. He says he sees figures following him around the house, shadowy shapes that disappear when he looks directly at them. Then there are the pictures. A few times when we've taken photos inside the house, strange people, figures we don't recognize, have appeared in the background. And the voices. Every night I hear whispering. The first few times I was terrified, but now I've grown so used to it that I just tune it out. But when my friends sleep over, they hear it too, and they don't tune it out. Some refuse to sleep at all. One friend was so scared she just lay there, frozen, unable to move until morning. Honestly, I could keep going. The list of weird experiences in this house is endless. I don't know what's here, but I know I'm not imagining it. What do you think? Have you ever experienced anything like this? My father was a pilot for a national airline in Colombia for 20 years. Because of his job, my mother was used to him traveling all over the world. In October of 1966, he told her he was retiring from flying and had been offered an executive position with the airline. That meant we would be moving to Bogota, the capital. He had already bought land there and was building a home for us. With the move ahead, we started preparing, selling our current home and handling last-minute tasks. Then, on March 22, 1967, at exactly 5:00 p.m., my father called my mother. He had just arrived in Bogota from a trip to Europe. He told her he was going to drive home to Medellin, where we lived. It was a long journey, about 14 hours by car, but he didn't want to wait. The last flight to Medellin had already left, and my mother urged him to stay the night in Bogota. She pointed out that he was exhausted from traveling and that if he waited for the first flight in the morning, he'd arrive at nearly the same time as if he drove. But my father was eager to come home. He had been away for 2 weeks and wanted to see my mother, my siblings, and me as soon as possible. No matter how much she insisted, he wouldn't change his mind. Instead, he arranged to drive with a fellow pilot who was also headed to Medellin with his family. At around 1:00 a.m., his friend pulled over and admitted he was too tired to continue. He suggested they stop in a nearby town, rest for the night, and resume the trip in the morning. But my father refused, saying that stopping would only delay him more than if he had just taken the morning flight. He decided to keep going alone. The pilot and his family stayed behind, but the pilot's teenage son, not wanting my father to drive by himself, volunteered to go with him. Back home, my mother went to bed, but she was uneasy. She knew my father had chosen to take a long, difficult route through the mountains between Bogota and Medellin. It was a dangerous road. Still, she hoped he would arrive safely. Then, at about 5:30 a.m., she heard it. The sound of footsteps on the stairs leading to our third-floor apartment. The jingle of keys. The slight creak of the front door opening. A wave of relief washed over her. He had made it. She lay in bed, listening as his footsteps approached the bedroom. But then, nothing. The door never opened. At exactly 7:30 a.m., the phone rang. An executive from Avianca, the airline my father worked for, was on the other end. The moment my mother heard his voice, she knew. Before he could even speak, she said, "Don't tell me. He's dead." The executive hesitated, then tried to reassure her. "Everything is okay," he said, but she didn't believe him. "I know something is wrong," she insisted. Then, finally, he admitted it. My father had been in a car accident at exactly 5:30 a.m. It happened in Caldas, a small town just 45 minutes from Medellin. He didn't survive. The boy who had accompanied him, however, walked away without a single scratch. 12 years later, he met the same fate, this time with his wife and 2 children by his side. For most of my young life, I was the focus of a poltergeist. Now, at 32, I haven't experienced anything for more than 5 years, but the memories are still vivid. It started early. One of my first memories was the front door of our old Pennsylvania farmhouse swinging open every evening, always around 8:00 p.m. It became such a routine that we stopped questioning it. When the latch clicked and the door eased open, someone in the family would casually say, "George is home. Go shut the door." And we would. Even when the deadbolt was locked, the door still unlatched. My dad finally replaced the entire thing when I was about 12. After that, the door stayed shut. Maybe George's key just didn't work anymore. That's when things started getting strange. One Sunday during dinner, my family was gathered in the kitchen when across the room, a cupboard door slowly creaked open. My sister and I were the only ones facing it. As we watched, a box toppled over, and two more stood up on their own. A second later, the cupboard closed again, just as deliberately as it had opened. We sat frozen, our eyes meeting in disbelief. To this day, we both remember it clearly, as if it happened yesterday. After that, the activity seemed to focus on me. The scariest moment happened one night when I was home alone, talking to my girlfriend on the phone. I had the stereo on, playing classical music. Wagner's In the Hall of the Mountain King. The only light in the room came from a kerosene lamp, flickering softly. As we talked, I joked about the ghost in our house, laughing like it was all just a silly story. Then, the stereo started acting up. The music sped up, then slowed down, twisting into an eerie, distorted version of itself. At the same time, the lamp's flame began flickering wildly, almost like a strobe light. My girlfriend's voice on the other end of the line turned frantic. She was asking what was happening, but I couldn't answer. I was frozen. The air felt heavy. Then suddenly, the flame shot up with a whoosh, filling the room with a bright flash of light, just as the music snapped back to normal. I sat there, drenched in a cold sweat, while my girlfriend cried on the phone. I wasn't laughing anymore. A year later, another strange thing happened. One afternoon, I came home to grab my golf clubs before heading back out to meet my friends. But when I went to my room, they were gone. My mom had no idea where they were. No one did. Here's the weirdest part. Some of us had this hazy memory of my dad loaning them to a stranger. It felt more like a dream than something real, but we all remembered the same details. A man standing in the dining room, my dad handing him the clubs. But when we brought it up, my dad got irritated. He swore up and down that he had never lent them to anyone. The clubs stayed missing for over a week. Then, one random afternoon, I came home, walked into my room, and there they were, lying in my bed. The club heads rested neatly on my pillow, and the bag was tucked under the blankets, right where I slept. My mom had been home all day and swore we hadn't had any visitors. She even accused me of playing a prank on her. But my room was on the 3rd floor. There was no way someone could have snuck in without her knowing. This was just one of many incidents. The poltergeist followed me to college. It followed me when I moved across the country. Things would move on their own, sometimes in front of others. Precious objects would disappear, only to reappear later in places impossible to miss. Even in the early years of my marriage, the strange occurrences continued. I don't fear him, but I don't laugh at him either. Williamsburg, Virginia, is a place full of history, old buildings, quiet streets, and echoes of the past that seem to linger in the air. On April 9, 1995, something happened there that I still can't explain. It took place at a building called The Magazine, a structure dating back to 1715. It sits in the heart of colonial Williamsburg, right across from the governor's mansion. That day, my high school choir was visiting the town. Being a history lover, I was eager to explore. I had 2 friends with me, Joe and Michelle. The building itself was simple, 3 stories tall, but the top floor was closed off. Each floor was just a single empty room, connected by a spiral staircase. Outside, a low stone wall surrounded the building, and there was an old guard post nearby. It was just the 3 of us inside when it happened. Joe and I were near the staircase on the 2nd floor, while Michelle was off looking at something in the corner. Then, out of nowhere, we heard footsteps, someone walking quickly up the stairs. They were heavy, purposeful, and getting closer. Instinctively, Joe and I moved aside, expecting to see someone appear at the top, but no one did. Michelle walked over, and we decided to head down to the first floor to get out of the way. But as we reached the bottom, something felt off. There was no one on the stairs, no one in the room, and when we stepped outside to check, the street was empty. Later that evening, we sat in a restaurant, still thinking about it. I finally brought it up to Joe. "Did you hear those footsteps?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, I did." But then we realized something even stranger. We never heard them going back down. Whoever, or whatever, walked up those stairs had never left. That night, back at our hotel in Washington, D.C., I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I tried to sleep, but something else happened that made me even more certain we weren't just imagining things. I was in the shower when I heard it. Soft, distant, but clear. A voice. Someone speaking inside the bathroom. I froze. The rest of the room was quiet. My friends already asleep. But for a moment, it felt like I wasn't alone. When I finally got out, I found Joe had taken up the whole bed. Too tired to argue, I grabbed a pillow and settled on the floor. As I lay there, staring at the soft glow of the hallway light under the door, something strange happened. The light started shrinking, as if the door was slowly closing on its own. My heart pounded. I squeezed my eyes shut and buried my face in the pillow. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted off. But in the morning, I woke up somewhere else. I had fallen asleep on the floor, but now I was back in the bed, my pillow in my arms. I had no memory of moving, and I wasn't the only one. Another friend, Ryan, had fallen asleep in a chair the night before. He woke up on the other side of the room, wrapped in a blanket he never grabbed. In another room, a classmate who had fallen asleep on top of his blankets woke up tucked neatly under them, fully clothed. None of them had ever sleepwalked before. None of us could explain what had happened. I know some might say the voice I heard was just the heater or the water pipes. Maybe the shifting light was my tired mind playing tricks on me. But that staircase at the magazine, that was real. Those footsteps were real. I never found out who or what was in that building with us. But in my mind, I can still picture him. A young man, maybe in his 20s, dark hair, dark eyes, dressed in simple clothes, moving quickly as if he had somewhere important to be. And yet, I don't think he ever got there. Maybe he was a soldier. Maybe he was on a secret mission, something lost to history. Maybe he never left that place at all. I haven't read much about the history of the magazine, and maybe I never will. But I have a feeling he wants people to know his story. Have you ever experienced something like this? Let me know. Maybe we can figure it out together. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I had just finished unpacking my things in my dorm room, and my family had said their goodbyes. It felt strange being on my own for the first time, but I was excited to start this new chapter. Later that day, my roommate finally arrived. Right away, I could tell something was off. I greeted him with a handshake, introducing myself as Dan. He just stared at my hand for a moment, like he wasn't sure what to do. Then, almost as an afterthought, he let out a small, awkward laugh and gave me a weak, limp handshake. He didn't even tell me his name. I had to ask. "Dale," he finally said. I tried to make conversation, asking about his major, where he was from, the usual stuff. But he barely answered, giving short yes or no responses, sometimes forcing a small, uncomfortable smile. Within minutes, we had both fallen into silence, sitting on our beds, each staring at our laptops. I already knew I did not want to live with this guy. Still, I figured he was just shy, maybe socially awkward. No big deal, right? But as the days went on, I realized Dale wasn't just awkward. He was something else entirely. That first night, I went out to explore the campus and meet some people. When I got back to the dorm, Dale was still in the same exact position, staring at his laptop. I said, "What's up, Dale?" But he didn't respond. I wasn't surprised. It was getting late, around 9:30, so I decided to get some sleep. I turned off my lamp and climbed into bed. Dale, on the other hand, stayed on his laptop for hours. I could see the glow from his screen even with my eyes closed. Finally, around 3 a.m., he shut it. The room was quiet. I sighed in relief and drifted off. But not long after, I woke up. The room was different. The blinds were open now, and pale moonlight spilled into the room, casting shadows along the walls. I rubbed my eyes, confused. Hadn't I closed them before bed? And then I saw him. Dale was sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at me. I sat up quickly. "Dale, what the hell are you doing?" For a moment, he didn't answer. Then, in the quietest whisper, he said, "Sorry." And just like that, he laid down and turned away. The next morning, Dale was gone before I even woke up. It was the first time I'd seen him leave the room. That day was orientation. The campus was buzzing with excitement. Students walking in groups, exploring the school, getting to know each other. I was relieved to be out of the dorm and around normal people. As we walked past the gardens, I overheard 2 students whispering, "What is that kid doing?" I followed their gaze. It was Dale. He was sitting in the dirt behind a bush, rubbing the bark of a tree with his hand. Our orientation leader didn't seem to notice, but the 2 students beside me looked disturbed. I hesitated before admitting, yeah, that's my roommate." They both gave me a look of sympathy, even apologizing. I laughed it off, but deep down, I was uncomfortable. That night, I met up with the 2 guys from orientation, and for the first time, I felt like things were turning around. Even better, when I got back to my dorm, I found out the school had reassigned me to a different room. Tomorrow, I'd be moving out. I was relieved. I just had to get through one last night. When I returned to the dorm, Dale was sitting in the desk chair, facing the door. I paused. "Oh, hey, what's up?" "Nothing." His voice was flat. I tried to ignore him, sitting down at my bed and opening my laptop. But something was wrong. My emails were open, ones I was sure I hadn't read yet. I checked my folders, and several had been accessed. Dale had gone through my computer. I turned to him. "Did you go through my stuff?" His response came instantly, too fast. "No." His voice was louder than before, almost defensive. I knew he was lying. But at this point, I was too close to moving out to pick a fight. I sighed and got ready for bed. As I dug through my bag for my pajamas, I noticed something else. My clothes had been moved. Again, I said nothing. One more night. Just one more night. But in the middle of the night, I woke up again. The sound was quiet, but in the stillness of the room, it was clear as day. I turned over, and there was Dale. He was digging through my bag. I shot up and turned on the lamp. "Dale, what are you doing?" He looked at me, startled, then mumbled, "I think you have my toothbrush by mistake." I didn't believe him for a second. I didn't say anything. I just turned off the light and lay back down, wide awake until morning. As soon as I could, I packed up and moved into my new room. My new roommate wasn't the most social guy, but compared to Dale, he was a saint. We actually had a conversation, one that felt normal. That night, I finally felt at peace. But for the 3rd night in a row, I woke up to a noise, a faint, clicking sound. At first, I thought it might be something in the room, maybe a bag shifting or a creaky floorboard. But then I listened closer. The sound was coming from the door. My stomach turned. I slowly got out of bed and stepped toward it, pressing my ear against the wood. Click, click. It wasn't random. Someone was messing with the lock. Heart pounding. I looked through the peephole. I saw the top of someone's head. They were standing right there, looking down, their hands near the doorknob. I knew who it was. I grabbed my phone and quietly dialed the campus police. They arrived in less than 5 minutes. Only when I heard them in the hallway did I open the door. And there he was, Dale, in cuffs. I told the officers everything, that he had been my roommate, that he'd gone through my things, that I switched dorms. And now, here he was, trying to get into my new room. They took him away. I never saw him again. I don't know if he got suspended or expelled, but all I know is that he was gone. And for the rest of my time at university, I lived like any other student. But every once in a while, I still think about Dale. And when I do, I always wonder, what was he planning to do if he had gotten inside? I went to Binghamton University for 2 years. In that time, I made a solid group of friends, and we went out almost every weekend. One Friday night in October, when we didn't have any big plans, 2 of my close friends and I decided to do something different, hang out at the school's nature preserve by the lake. There was a small clearing on the far side, perfect for a fire. It was hidden from view, far enough from campus security that students would occasionally come here to drink, smoke, or do other things they wouldn't want to get caught doing. But it wasn't a well-known spot, and we liked that about it. That night, we brought some beers, lit a fire, and had what we used to call a bro chat. Just us, the crackling fire, and the stillness of the woods around us. As the night went on and the alcohol took effect, time seemed to speed up. At one point, we were laughing so hard that one of my friends actually rolled onto the ground, clutching his stomach. That's when my other friend suddenly shushed us. We stopped laughing immediately. The night grew eerily quiet. Then we heard it, the crunch of leaves. It was distant at first, but it was definitely footsteps. Someone, or something, was out there. Instantly, we panicked. We weren't supposed to be drinking, and while it wasn't common, campus police occasionally patrolled the woods on weekends looking for students getting into trouble. Without hesitation, we threw our bottles into the lake and stuffed the rest of the beers into a backpack. We sat still listening. The footsteps weren't going away. If anything, they were getting closer. A branch snapped, louder this time. We all tensed. This spot was so far into the woods, so secluded, that it was extremely rare for anyone else to be out here. But someone was. None of us were the kind of people to stand up and yell, "Who's there?" We were too paranoid for that. Instead, we just sat there, whispering "shat" to each other, as if we could somehow silence the entire forest. Then we realized whoever was out there wasn't just walking. They were circling us. Or at least, walking in a C shape around our little clearing. It was like something out of the Blair Witch Project. The occasional crunch of leaves or snap of a branch would echo through the trees. At first, we nervously laughed it off. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe it was nothing. Then something crashed into the middle of our campfire site. We all jumped. At first, I didn't understand. Even though I saw what had happened, it took me a second to process. A branch, a pretty big one, had been thrown into the center of our campfire ring. One of my friends didn't even hesitate. He just took off running. My other friend and I just sat there, looking at each other, still unsure if this was some kind of joke or something much worse. Then, out of nowhere, another branch flew through the trees, smacking my friend in the face. He screamed in pain, clutching his cheek. That was it. I grabbed the backpack, yanked him up, and we ran. We ran as fast as we could, our hearts pounding, lungs burning. The only thing between us and safety was a road that separated the woods from our dorms. When we reached it, we stopped panting, trying to catch our breath. And then we heard it. Footsteps. Whoever had been in the woods was following us. We didn't even look. We just ran again, straight into our dorm, slamming the door behind us. When we got up to our floor, we found our other friend, asterisk, the one who ran first, asterisk, already back in his room. He had bolted the second he heard that first branch hit the ground. Still breathing heavily, we walked over to his window. It had a clear view of the nature preserve. And then we saw him. A dark figure was pacing back and forth by the edge of the woods. Every time a car passed by on the road, the figure would step back into the trees, hiding. Then, when the road was empty again, they'd return to pacing. They were waiting. Eventually, after what felt like forever, the figure disappeared into the woods. We never saw them again. That night, we stayed in my friend's dorm, still drinking, still laughing, trying to shake off what had just happened. But the next morning, when the alcohol had worn off and the adrenaline had settled, we all realized something. That wasn't funny. That was terrifying. We never went back into those woods after dark again. I had no interest in rushing a fraternity, but that didn't mean I wasn't going to party. After all, I was attending a party school. My roommate, however, was dead set on rushing, and he had a whole plan. Thursday night at one frat, Friday at another, and then another on Saturday. That Thursday night, we were headed to a low-ranked frat. Pretty sure it was underground too, not even officially recognized by the school. But his logic? Have a backup in case the real frats wouldn't give him a bid. The house was far from campus, deep in a sketchy, run-down part of town. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect a frat to be. If it weren't for the blasting music and cars crammed along the street, we wouldn't have even known there was a party inside. We knocked. The door swung open, revealing a short, chubby guy in a sweaty white t-shirt, clutching a solo cup. "Come in," he said, grinning. Inside, the living room was packed with about 50 guys, all crammed together, the air thick with heat, sweat, and the stench of cheap beer. The lighting was horrible, just a dim yellow glow from some weak bulbs. Worst of all, I counted maybe 2 girls in the entire house, and let's just say, they weren't exactly frat party material. I gave it 20 minutes, making small talk with a bunch of awkward, antisocial dudes who barely spoke English. I waved at my roommate, silently signaling that we should get the hell out of here. But there was a huge group of guys blocking the door, so we decided to wait a little longer. I kept drinking, downing 5 cups of their cheap beer before I even started feeling it. That's when he came over. A big, heavy guy with a tiny bottle in his hand. He smirked and handed it to me. "That'll get you shit-faced," he said. I forced a laugh, thanked him, and hoped he'd walk away. But he didn't. He just stood there watching me, waiting. So, reluctantly, I took a sip. It was about 2 shots worth of some kind of hard liquor. Strong. Probably whiskey or vodka. The guy kept talking, forcing me into some one-sided conversation that I had zero interest in. Every time I hinted at leaving, he pulled me back in. Then, suddenly, things got blurry. The room felt darker. My head spun. And then, nothing. I woke up in a bed. A dark room. For a moment, I had no idea where I was. Then, through the muffled thump of music, I realized I was still in the frat house. I blinked, trying to adjust to the darkness. The room was bare, except for a small closet and some basic furniture. That's when I heard it. A plastic bag crinkling, coming from inside the closet, like someone had stepped on it by mistake. I ran. Didn't think. Didn't look. Just bolted out of that room, down the stairs, and straight into the overcrowded living room. I spotted my roommate, grabbed him, and shoved him out the front door, pushing past the same group of guys who had been standing by the entrance the whole time. As we drove back to campus, I told my roommate what happened. I think I was drugged. His hands tightened on the wheel. "I'm calling the cops," he said. "No," I said. "It'd be pointless." Then he asked something that made my stomach drop. "Do you think you were taken advantage of?" I quickly checked myself. My clothes were still on. I didn't feel any pain or anything weird. I think I got lucky. When I checked the time, I realized I had only been out for maybe 10 minutes before I woke up. Whatever that guy gave me must have been a dud. Or maybe he was waiting to come back. Either way, that was the first and last underground frat party I ever went to. And to this day, it remains the scariest experience of my life. In 2003, my mom, my sister, and I moved into a rented ground floor apartment. My parents had divorced when I was little, so it had always been just the 3 of us. At first, the new place was perfect, quiet, peaceful, exactly what we needed. But a year in, things changed. It started with noises. Late at night, we hear banging, scratching, and footsteps coming from the apartment above us. At first, we thought it was just a neighbor, but then we found out no one was living up there. The flat was empty. Yet night after night, the sounds continued. The footsteps would start at dusk, and go on until dawn. Eventually, my mom had enough. She spoke to the landlord, who assured her that no one was staying in the apartment above. He only went up there during the day for renovations. He told us to call him if we ever heard the noises again. That night, at around 11 p.m., the banging returned. Frustrated, my mom banged back on the ceiling. Silence. Then, a heavy thud, followed by something scurrying across the floor above us. After a moment of eerie quiet, the noises started up again. My mom went straight to the landlord's house. He came over immediately, but by the time he arrived, everything had gone still. He checked the upstairs apartment. Nothing. This became a pattern. The landlord eventually stopped taking us seriously, said it was just our imagination. One weekend, when he and his family were away, my sister and I decided to check for ourselves. We went upstairs. The door was unlocked. Inside, the place was unfinished. Scratched floors, bare walls, missing doors. Tools were scattered around, but it was clear no one had been living there. We left without any answers, just an uneasy feeling. That night, things got worse. The knocking on the walls was louder. The windows shook. Then, a loud crash from our kitchen door jolted us awake. We ran to check. The door was open, just slightly, but we had locked it before going to bed. The burglar gate was still latched. No sign of forced entry. No reason for it to be open. Shaken, my mom burned incense and we prayed. The activity didn't stop completely after that, but it lessened. To this day, I don't know what was in that upstairs flat. And honestly, I don't think I want to. Underscore 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 underscore. Have you ever experienced anything like this? Let me know in the comments. Some stories stay with you forever. This was one of them. Back in the early 1980s, I was a student nurse at Ermelo Hospital in South Africa. My shifts rotated between day and night duty, taking me through different wards. One night, I was assigned to the children's ward, a quiet place after dark, unless it was full. I'd heard ghost stories about it, but at the time, I didn't believe in such things. That night, only 5 children were in the ward. The setup was simple: 5 cubicles with 2 beds each, and a larger, rarely used cubicle with 6 beds. From the duty room, glass partitions gave me a clear view of everything. The first cubicle held 2 young boys, the second had a baby in a cot, the third was empty, and the fourth had 2 little girls. After my rounds, I found the children sleeping peacefully. The night passed uneventfully at first. The baby stirred now and then, but otherwise, all was calm. I helped the doctors during their rounds, gave out medications with the night sister, and then returned to the duty room to write my reports. Around 2 a.m., the phone rang. A doctor informed me he was sending over a young boy for observation. The night sister arrived shortly after to assist with his admission. He was a chubby red-headed boy with tight curls and a pout that made it clear he wasn't happy to be there. His parents stayed for a short while, but eventually, after some reassurance, they left. The boy didn't take it well. He screamed and cried, refusing to settle. The night sister chuckled. "Looks like you've got a live wire here. Call me if he doesn't calm down." Then she left, leaving me alone with him. I pulled up a chair beside his cot and started singing softly, hoping to soothe him. Slowly, his cries faded. His little body relaxed. His breathing steadied, and the medication began to take effect. The nurse from the female ward dropped by for a quick chat, checking on the other children before heading back. The boy still hadn't fallen asleep, so I kept singing. Then, something changed. I felt it before I saw anything. A presence behind me. Assuming it was the nurse returning, I spoke without turning, but no one answered. A chill crept over my skin. At that exact moment, the boy sat up, his eyes wide with delight. He giggled, stretching his arms out toward the foot of the cot, as if greeting someone. He followed something unseen with his eyes, his tiny fingers reaching toward the empty space beside him. My breath caught in my throat. The air around me felt different, heavy, charged. Every instinct told me we weren't alone. I bolted. Running straight to the female ward, I burst into the duty room, breathless. The nurses turned to me, startled. "You look like you've seen a ghost," one of them said. It took me a moment to find my voice. When I finally told them what had happened, they exchanged knowing looks. Then, hesitantly, they agreed to come back with me. We found the boy fast asleep, curled under his blanket, sucking his thumb. The room was still, peaceful, too peaceful. The other nurses didn't linger. They left quickly, whispering among themselves. I stood there, shaken, unable to ignore the stories I'd heard about the ward. One tale spoke of a grieving mother who had lost her baby. Overcome with sorrow, she had taken her own life and was set to roam the ward, searching for her child. Another told of a little boy who had died after surgery. Nurses had reported hearing his small voice at night, asking for water. That night I couldn't shake the feeling that the spirit of the mother had come to comfort the boy, helping me soothe him to sleep. Whether it was her or something else, I'll never know. But it's a memory I'll never forget. Years later, I found myself surrounded by people who understood these experiences better than I did. My closest friends, Jay, Elaine, and Tim, were my go-to group whenever something unexplainable happened. Jay could sense spirits but not communicate with them. Elaine, like me, could sense and hear them, and strangely, my maternal grandmother often used her to reach me. Then there was Tim, Elaine's husband, a full-on medium who could speak to spirits and understand them in ways I never could. Together, they helped me navigate the unexplainable. But some things still haunt me. In 2012, before I met Elaine and Tim, I experienced one of the eeriest nights of my life. I was sleeping in the pink room of my house when my phone rang in the early hours of the morning. Half asleep, I answered. White noise. A low, crackling static. Scratching sounds. The kind of noise that sends chills straight down your spine. I hung up immediately, my heart pounding. It took forever to fall back asleep. Even now, the memory unsettles me. To this day, I silence my phone at night, just in case it happens again. But it didn't stop with me. Over the years, my younger sister started getting the same calls. Her phone would ring, and when she answered, static, white noise, the same eerie sound. I had never told her about my experience, yet she described it exactly. She handled it better than I did, but I couldn't ignore the pattern. Then, in May 2014, it spread to my mom. My dad, who called her every night, started noticing strange interference, but only when she answered in the pink room. The static was so loud, he often had to end the call. It wasn't just him. Anyone who spoke to her while she was in that room heard the same interference. To this day, we don't know why. And honestly, maybe we don't want to. What do you think? Have you ever experienced something like this? Some things defy explanation, no matter how hard we try to make sense of them. When my mom started experiencing the same strange phone interference, she finally confided in me. She described the noise as gremlins on the line, and though she tried to brush it off, I could tell it unsettled her. I reached out to Tim. Almost immediately, he picked up on something. An elderly woman, possibly in her late 60s or 70s. She seemed frail, as if she had been in a coma before passing. But what struck me most was Tim's certainty. She wasn't just any spirit. She was blood-related to us, and my grandmother was helping her reach out. No matter how much we thought about it, we couldn't figure out who she was. Tim explained that she had first tried to contact me, then my sister, and now my mom. After years of being ignored, she was growing desperate, frustrated enough to make her presence impossible to dismiss. Tim urged us to stay calm and listen. One Saturday morning, as my mom spoke on the phone, the interference returned. But this time, something changed. Beneath the static, she heard a woman's voice. Can you hear me?" The words came twice, faint but unmistakable. Shaken, she came straight to me, her face pale. She recounted what had happened, her voice trembling. Tim reassured us. The spirit was making progress. We just needed to be patient. Later that day, my mom asked me to call her from another room. I dialed her number. My phone rang endlessly, yet through the wall, I could hear her answering hello, hello. The call never connected. I tried again. This time it went through, but after about a minute, the line was filled with scratching noises before it suddenly cut off. A few nights later, just as I was drifting into sleep, I heard it. "Can you hear me now?" A whisper, close, directly in my ear. It repeated twice. I opened my eyes, heart pounding, but the room was silent. Nothing followed. And yet, for some reason, I felt no fear. Tim later confirmed what I had already sensed. The spirit meant no harm. If she had, my grandmother and Charlie, my spiritual guardian, would have blocked her. Instead, Gran was helping her push through, urging us to listen. A woman named Jackie, from a spiritual community I frequent, once shared her thoughts on the situation. Without knowing many details, she described the woman perfectly. Her insights felt profound, validating everything we had sensed. But as much as her words resonated, I believe she should share that part of the story herself. Because some things, some connections, are too personal to be told secondhand. Back in the early 1980s, I was working night duty in the male ward at Newcastle Provincial Hospital in northern KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. It wasn't a particularly busy night. 2 wards at the front were full, with smaller side wards near the duty room, while the larger back wards stood empty. But something strange had already happened earlier that day. I had been asleep in my flat, resting before my shift, when a loud bang jolted me awake. It was around 2:30 p.m. Confused, I looked around the room, searching for the source of the noise. At the foot of my bed, on the carpet, lay a small, heart-shaped photo holder, one that had always sat securely on my TV stand. The windows were shut. No draft. I picked it up and froze. The face in the photo had changed. The once familiar image now wore a grotesque, twisted grin, something unnatural, something wrong. A chill ran through me. Shaking it off, I crawled back into bed, telling myself I had imagined it. That night, when I arrived at the hospital, I casually asked the ward sister about a patient, Mr. So-and-so. She looked at me solemnly. "He passed away this afternoon." I hesitated. "Do you know what time?" She told me. It was the exact moment the photo had fallen. I hesitantly shared my experience with her, but she dismissed it as a coincidence. I wasn't so sure. Midnight came, and most of our work was done. The sister, another nurse, and I sat in the open duty room, chatting as I updated patient files. My back was to the hallway leading to the empty back wards. Through the glass doors, I had a clear view of the 3rd ward. And then, I noticed it. The nightlight above bed 3 flickered on. I frowned. The ward was empty. Patients had been moved to the front wards. There was no reason for that light to be on. I assumed it was a glitch. 5 minutes later, it switched off. Strange, but not alarming. Then it turned on again. This time, I mentioned it to the sister and nurse. We watched as it continued, switching on and off at odd intervals, as if controlled by something unseen. The sister suggested I check it out. I refused. Something about it felt wrong. As the hours passed, the light continued its pattern. Around 2 a.m., I decided to wake a patient in a nearby side ward, a kind, half-blind priest. He listened to me, nodding calmly. "Do not fear," he said. "Go into the ward and pray." I hesitated. As I left his room, I caught the faint scent of sulfur in the air. By 5 a.m., after morning medications and coffee, I gathered my courage. I stepped into the empty ward. Slowly, I approached bed 3. As I pulled back the curtain, I heard it, a faint, swishing sound. I turned toward the source. On a nearby cupboard, a fan was running at full blast. But that wasn't possible. It was hospital policy to turn off appliances in unused wards. I switched it off, whispered a quick prayer, and left. Later, when the day staff arrived, I asked about the ward. One of the nurses confirmed something chilling: the man who had died the previous afternoon. He had been in bed 3. His body had only been moved after he passed. She then shared her own eerie experience. The previous day, she had been in that ward, looking out the window at some commotion outside. She felt someone sit on the bed behind her. Turning, she saw the unmistakable imprint of a body pressing into the mattress. But no one was there. She also swore she had turned off that fan before leaving. I turned to the ward sister. "Coincidence?" I asked. She simply smiled, shaking her head in disbelief. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that some souls linger, whether for unfinished business or something we may never understand. And sometimes, all we can do is listen. What do you think? Have you ever experienced something like this? The only available space was the 4th ward, directly across from the side ward where the deceased man's body had been placed. As we approached, we noticed something unsettling. The side ward's light was on, brightly burning, even though it had been off earlier. I turned to the sister. "I'm not touching that light," I said flatly. Without another word, we admitted the new patient, carefully avoiding any mention of the light to the day staff. We never set foot in that side ward again. I never considered myself someone who sought out the paranormal. In fact, I actively avoided it. For most of my life, I prided myself on being non-sensitive. Strange things happened to other people, not me. But when I was about 16, that changed. Growing up in Africa, I often heard my mother, grandmother, and others speak of unexplained occurrences. Many were attributed to cultural beliefs, witchcraft, spirits taking the form of animals, or bad omens. I never paid much attention. Until one night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was around 1 a.m. when I woke to a strange noise coming from the kitchen. A rustling sound, like plastic crinkling or chains rattling. It grew louder. And then, something worse. A deep, overwhelming wrongness settled over me. A creeping unease that wasn't just fear. It was something else entirely. Then, as if in response to that feeling, my body changed. Heavy, lethargic. I tried to move. I couldn't. I tried to scream. I couldn't. My eyes were closed, but somehow I could see. At the foot of my bed stood a tall, shadowy figure. It was dark, featureless, but its presence was undeniable. Before I could even process what I was seeing, it moved. And then, it sat on my feet. I felt it. The pressure. The warmth of it. I couldn't breathe. The weight of the figure pressed down, inching up my body, creeping toward my chest. I panicked. In my mind, I did the only thing I could. I prayed. I begged, pleaded, "Jesus, help me." And then, the heaviness vanished. I gasped and bolted upright, my body drenched in sweat. With trembling hands, I switched on the light and began singing hymns, anything to push away the lingering terror. I stayed awake until nearly 5 a.m., too afraid to close my eyes. When I finally slept, it was only for an hour. The next morning, my entire body ached. The experience left me shaken, but it wasn't the only thing that happened during that time. I often studied late at night in the dining room. To my right was a large window, and outside it stood a tall evergreen shrub, about 4 or 5 feet high. Around midnight, I would feel it. A presence, watching. On calm, windless nights, I saw them, dark, darting shapes moving past the window. I told myself it was just my imagination, until my cat proved otherwise. One night, as I studied, the feeling returned, that unshakable sensation of being watched. Then my cat, who was normally calm, started acting strangely. She jumped from couch to couch in the sitting room, her gaze following something unseen. There was nothing there. Nothing I could see, at least. That was the last time I studied in the dining room. From that night on, I stayed in my bedroom. As an African, I was always told that experiences like mine were caused by evil spirits sent by someone with bad intentions, a curse. But in Western culture, similar events are explained as sleep paralysis, a trick of the brain under stress. I don't know which is true. All I know is that a year later, it happened again. The heaviness, the paralysis, the unseen presence pressing down on me. Each time, my only refuge was prayer. To this day, I wonder, was it truly a spiritual attack, as my culture believes? Or something else entirely? I'm 16 now, but this story takes me back to when I was 8 years old. We lived in Pretoria, South Africa, in a big 2-story house with a basement. The ground floor had the living room, kitchen, dining room, a bathroom, and a study. All our bedrooms and another bathroom were upstairs. It started as a normal day, school, homework, playing outside with friends. But strange things had already begun happening in my room. Objects moved. Scratching sounds echoed from the walls. Once, as I lay on my bed reading, a heavy book flew across the room. From the window side, the windows and curtains were shut. There was no wind. Then came the closet incident. I was sitting on my bed, a solid 2 meters away from the closet. And then, I crashed into it. I wasn't jumping. I wasn't moving. 1 second, I was sitting. The next, I was thrown against the closet. I had no explanation. Some things in life defy logic. Some things happen whether we believe in them or not. And sometimes, no matter how much we try to ignore them, they refuse to be ignored. It was a quiet Saturday night, and I was home alone. I had fallen asleep, comfortable in my bed, when something woke me up. A voice. Siri was talking. Still half asleep, I grabbed my phone and turned it off. Probably just a glitch, I thought. Nothing to worry about. I set it aside and drifted back to sleep. But an hour later, Siri's voice woke me again. This time, it wasn't random. She was responding to something strange. What that found for us. Her answer sent a chill through me. The answer is Thursday, July 4th, 1776. That was weird, really weird, but I told myself it had to be a bug, some odd malfunction. I shut my eyes and tried to ignore it. Then, it happened a third time. Siri spoke again, but now the words she responded to were different. My full name. Her answer? Here's the info for my name. I froze. My stomach twisted into knots. That was it. I wasn't staying in my room any longer. I grabbed my phone, ran straight to my parents' room, locked the door, and refused to go back. Even now, I tell myself it was just a glitch, but deep down, I still wonder. It was late, around 2 a.m. I was sitting at my desk, lost in a computer game, when a sudden knock at my window made my heart jump. I spun around, staring at the glass, but there was nothing, no one. It was winter, and my window was shut tight. My room was on the first floor, so maybe some kids were messing around. I wasn't in the mood for pranks, so I pulled the blinds down. Hopefully, they'd get the message. Time passed. I got lost in my game again, almost forgetting about the knock. Then it happened again. A steady, deliberate tapping against the glass. I tensed up. My mind raced. Why? Whoever it was, why wouldn't they leave me alone? A small part of me thought, what if they actually needed help? What if it wasn't a prank? So, against every instinct screaming at me to ignore it, I reached for the blinds and slowly lifted them. Then, I made the worst mistake of my life. I cracked the window open, just an inch, just enough to listen. In a split second, hands shot out from the darkness and grabbed the bottom of the window. With terrifying strength, they forced it open. I screamed. A hooded figure in all black lunged toward me, trying to climb inside. My body moved before I could think. I started swinging, throwing wild punches at him. Desperate, I grabbed the lamp from my desk and slammed it against his head. The impact sent him stumbling backward. I didn't hesitate. I yanked the window shut and locked it. Through the glass, I saw him. He hesitated for a moment, then bolted, vanishing into the night. That was the single most horrifying moment of my life. I grew up in the kind of place where paved roads just ended, miles of open country. No neighbors close by. Nothing but quiet. That night, though, the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was unsettling. It started with a crash. Something slammed against the roof, then scraped loudly against the metal chimney. At first, I thought maybe a tree branch had fallen, but then I heard it again and again. For nearly an hour, I sat there listening. The banging was coming from inside the chimney. That didn't make sense. We had covered it for the summer. Nothing should have been able to get inside. Then, suddenly, the front door rattled, like someone was pulling on it, testing it. I held my breath and inched toward the peephole, but when I looked outside, nothing. The door kept shaking, as if an unseen hand was trying to open it. Something in me snapped. I couldn't take it anymore. I yanked the door open. And just like that, everything stopped. Silence. The night stretched out before me, still and undisturbed. I stood there for a long time before slowly closing the door, locking it tight. To this day, I have no idea what was out there. It was summer, and I was home alone, passing the time with movies in the living room. Then I heard it. A shuffling noise. It came from above me. I turned down the volume, listening carefully. The only thing above the living room was the attic. A cold unease settled in my chest. I stood up, my ears straining. The sound was faint, but it was there, movement, shifting, like something was inside. The attic was connected to my brother's room through his closet. I hesitated, but curiosity won over fear. I stepped into his room, opened the closet door, and reached for the attic hatch. It was pitch black inside. The light bulb had burned out ages ago, so I used my phone's flashlight. I climbed 2 steps inside, just 2, and then I heard it. A creaking sound, the weak wooden floorboards shifting under something's weight. Then, a soft rustling, like something brushing against a plastic bag on the floor. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I spun around, slammed the attic door shut, and called my parents. When my dad got home, he checked. He didn't find anything, but I'd never been able to shake the thought, what if something was really up there? And what if it still is? It was just me and my dog, Layla, at home that night. I had music playing in my room, loud enough that I shouldn't have heard anything else. But I did. Layla. She was barking like crazy. I frowned, lowering the volume. She was downstairs, but the barking was growing more frantic, more aggressive. Then, I heard her running. Not toward me, down the basement stairs. A sharp chill ran through me. What was she chasing? I followed, turning on the basement light. Layla stood in front of the boiler room door, stiff-legged, growling. Something was wrong. I hesitated, then knocked on the door. Hello? No answer. Layla went wild, jumping, clawing at the wood, as if desperate to break through. A terrible feeling crept over me. If something was in there, I did not want to see it. I grabbed her collar, dragged her upstairs, and locked the basement door. When my dad got home, I told him everything. He went down to check, but before he even reached the boiler room, he stopped. There was a ladder against the basement window. The glass had been smashed open. My dad's face went pale. He picked up his phone and called the police. And for the first time that night, I realized how close we had come to something truly terrifying. I didn't realize it at the time, but my dog, Leo, had just saved my life. It was a normal night, just me at home. My dad worked shifts that changed constantly, so I was used to being alone. On nights like these, I'd stay up late watching movies, knowing it would take me forever to fall asleep anyway. That night, after shutting off the TV, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling for about half an hour. Then, thump. Something inside my closet fell over. I froze, probably just a toy shifting. But then, the doorknob, it wiggled, turned, unlocked. I yanked the covers over my head, heart pounding. Silence stretched on. A full 2 minutes of nothing. Cautiously, I peeked out. A dark figure stood next to my bed, staring down at me. My scream shattered the silence. I scrambled against the wall, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The figure didn't lunge, didn't speak, just turned, looked toward the window, then silently walked out of the room. I stayed there, shaking, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. Finally, I crept out of bed, checking if he was really gone. The front door was wide open. I didn't sleep at all that night. I used to have a neighbor named Joey. He was obsessed with me. Every time I stepped outside, he stepped outside. It was like he was watching from his window, just waiting. He was 17, just a year older than me. But there was something off about him. He didn't seem to have friends. He was always home. At first, I tried subtle hints, avoiding eye contact, keeping my distance, but he wouldn't take the message. So one day, I finally told him, "I don't like you, Joey. Leave me alone." The look on his face haunts me to this day. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't anger. It was resentment, like a toddler denied a toy. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. One night, my parents left me home alone. I was working on a school project in my room when my bed shifted, like someone was moving underneath it. I hesitated, then slowly leaned over to look. Joey, lying under my bed. I screamed. He scrambled out as I ran. My first instinct wasn't even to call the police. I ran straight to his house, banging on the door, telling his parents everything. Joey never left my house. I called the cops. His parents begged me not to, but I ignored them. When the police arrived, they found Joey still hiding in my room. And then they searched his room. They found pictures of me, dozens, maybe hundreds. Pictures taken without me knowing. The worst one, a picture of me sleeping, taken from inside my room. Living in the countryside meant no close neighbors. It also meant long, peaceful summer days. Or at least, that's what I used to think. That day, the sun was out, so I was lying in my yard tanning. Then I saw him. A man, standing just inside the woods, watching me. I sat up quickly, my body tensed. Do you need something?" I called out. He stepped forward. "I live up the hill," he said. "My water pump's broken. Could you help me out?" I didn't believe him. Something about him set off every alarm in my head. I forced a smile. "Sorry, I'm about to head out." A lie, but there was no way I was going anywhere with him. The man hesitated, then turned. He walked back into the woods, disappearing behind a boulder. I grabbed my stuff, rushed inside, and locked everything. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. An hour later, I realized I had left my sunglasses outside. I hesitated, then decided it was safe enough to grab them. I stepped outside, scanned the area. No sign of him. I searched the grass for my sunglasses. When I finally found them, I stood up, and my stomach dropped. He was there. Not in the woods this time. Behind my shed. Only half his body was visible, just enough for me to see him watching me. I didn't hesitate. I screamed that I was calling the cops and ran inside. The police came, took my statement. I never saw him again. But I never felt safe outside again either. I was 7 years old. That's how young I was when I learned that monsters were real. I was staying at my grandma's house. She never drove, so she walked everywhere. That day, she wanted to go to the library, 10 blocks away. I didn't want to go, so she left me home alone. She gave me one rule: don't open the door for anyone. Sometime later, the phone rang. I was a dumb, curious kid, so I answered it. "Who is this?" A man's voice asked. "Danny," I said. "Are your parents home, Danny?" "No." "So you're home alone?" "Yes." "Where are you, Danny? Do you know the address?" I hesitated. Somewhere in Queens." "All right, Danny. Bye-bye now." He hung up. I barely thought about it. Until an hour later. A knock at the door. I stayed on the couch. I remembered what my grandma said. Then, "I see you on the couch, Danny." My blood turned to ice. I turned toward the window. He was standing on the porch. An ugly, gray-faced man with a thick beard and a gut. "Go away," I yelled. "I got some candy in my truck," he said. "Come on out, Danny." I ran. I locked myself in the guest room. Moments later, bang, bang, bang. He was trying to break in. Then, out of nowhere, "Hey, get the hell out of here." My grandma's voice. Through the window, I saw her charging into the yard, yelling. The man ran to his rusty pickup truck and sped off. She reported him to the police. To this day, I wonder, what if she had been just 10 minutes later? Moving out on my own felt like a dream, until the nightmare began. The house was small, just enough for 1 or 2 people, but from the very first night, I heard things. Scratching, shuffling, inside the walls. At first, I thought it was an animal, but then food started going missing. Milk ran out faster than I remembered. Then came the night I woke up to breathing. Not mine. It stopped the second I turned on the light. The next day, I inspected the air vents. Some weren't blowing air, including the one right next to my bed. I shined a flashlight inside. There were no air ducts. It was just a dark, hollow space. That night, I heard the breathing again. I grabbed my flashlight, pointed it at the vent, and screamed. A face stared back at me, wide eyes, watching me. I ran. Later, I learned the truth. A dangerous homeless man had been living inside my walls, and he had been watching me every single night. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. I used to have a Beagle Pointer mix named Mandy. She was the sweetest, most loyal dog anyone could ask for. She'd never hurt a soul, but she sure had a big mouth when something didn't seem right. I was 15 when this happened. It was late at night, and I was getting ready for bed. Mandy usually slept in my room, but when I walked in, I noticed something strange. She was standing there, low growls rumbling from her throat. She wasn't looking at me. She wasn't looking at anything, really, just staring, ears pinned back. I chuckled and asked what was wrong, but she only let out a small, annoyed sound before resting her head down again. For the next hour, every time I was just about to fall asleep, Mandy would start growling again. It was getting annoying, but I figured she was just restless. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted off. At 2 a.m., I woke up to find Mandy standing in the middle of the room, growling. This time, she was staring directly at my closet door. A chill ran through me as I followed her gaze. My closet was the kind that led up to a small attic crawlspace. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I don't know what I was thinking, but I decided to check. As I reached for the handle, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The attic door was cracked open. Every hair on my body stood on end. I turned and ran straight to my parents' room, shaking my dad awake. At first, he wasn't too concerned, until he saw Mandy, still standing guard, still growling. That's when his expression changed. Without hesitation, my dad grabbed a flashlight and stepped inside my closet. I held my breath. Seconds later, a terrifying crash rang out, followed by my dad shouting. Then I saw him. A tall man came rushing out of the closet, holding something in his hand, a hammer. I barely had time to react before Mandy lunged. She sank her teeth into his arm, locking on with everything she had. His screams filled the room as he thrashed, trying to shake her off. By then, my dad had recovered and tackled him to the ground. My mom grabbed my little brother's toy handcuffs, and together, we restrained him until the police arrived. Later, we learned that the man had been hiding in our attic, watching, waiting. If it weren't for Mandy, I shudder to think what could have happened to us that night. I was 11 and my little brother was 8. We were walking our dog, Buster, around the block after dark. Buster was a husky German shepherd mix, big, strong, and protective. As we rounded a corner, we noticed a man standing ahead. He smiled at us, stopping in his tracks as if expecting us to do the same. We didn't. We kept walking. Something about him felt off. My brother kept glancing back, whispering that the man was following us. He was right. Every time I turned to look, he would stop, pretending he wasn't watching. But as soon as we faced forward, he'd move closer. Panic set in. I grabbed my brother's hand and quickened our pace. The faster we walked, the faster he followed. Then, out of nowhere, my brother let out a muffled scream. The man had grabbed him. Before I could react, Buster did. He ripped the leash from my hands and lunged, sinking his teeth into the man's leg. The guy screamed in pain as blood soaked through his pants. That was enough to get the attention of our neighbors. Porch lights flicked on, doors opened, and suddenly, people were stepping outside. The man panicked and tried to limp away. I had to grab Buster's leash to stop him from chasing after him. One of our neighbors, a small but fierce woman, called the police and walked us home, telling our parents everything. Minutes later, officers caught the man limping a few blocks away. One of them called Buster a hero, but we already knew that. Last summer, I visited my friend Rose in Vermont, where she had recently moved. Her mom suggested a hike to Hamilton Falls, and the group included Rose, her mom's boyfriend and Dave, his next-door neighbor, his son, and me. The plan sounded fun and straightforward, but it turned into something I'll never forget. Rose and I went ahead of the others on the trail. About a mile ahead, we started to feel like someone was following us. It wasn't the others. They were too far behind, and the footsteps we heard, along with the snapping branches, were closer, just off the path. It wasn't an animal either. The forest was eerily quiet, devoid of wildlife sounds. We started talking, more to reassure ourselves than anything else, and even addressed the unseen presence, just in case it was listening. Neither of us had ever experienced anything like this before, and we were completely sober. No drugs, no alcohol. Still, the sensation persisted, becoming almost unbearable as we reached a clearing where some rocks offered a place to rest. After a short break, we continued, hoping to shake off the eerie feeling. Eventually, we reached a sign marking the trail to the falls, but as we followed it, the steps abruptly ended. Unsure of where to go, we headed straight down a slope and ended up at a still pool of water that was definitely not the falls. That's when we heard Dave calling us, and we rushed back up. When we told him we couldn't find the path, he seemed confused. He pointed out a very clearly marked trail leading directly to the falls. Rose and I exchanged baffled glances. We were certain that path hadn't been there before, but with no explanation, we followed Dave to the falls, where we spent about half an hour before starting our trek back. Again, Rose and I went ahead, and as the sun began to set, the unsettling feelings returned, stronger than before. The forest seemed darker than it should have been, and we quickened our pace, practically running toward the car. Rose started to panic. She said it felt like a wall had formed between us, making her feel disconnected and as though my voice was muffled and distant. I glanced back and saw two figures following us. One was clearly Dave's neighbor with his son on his shoulders. The other was a silhouette, a human-like figure, but it didn't look familiar. I assumed it was Rose's mom or Dave, though it didn't make sense for them to leave someone behind. When Dave's neighbor caught up to us, I asked him where the others were. He said they had stopped for a break. That's when I realized the silhouette was still there, walking at the same pace, even though Rose's mom and Dave were too far back to catch up in just a few minutes.